All right, ready to go. All right, thanks, Summer. I'd like to call the city council meeting to order on November 8th at 5 o'clock. We're starting early because we included in the agenda a workshop. And also, I just want to remind everybody, there's still time to vote. If you haven't voted, the courthouse is open to drop off your ballots, and I believe they're allowing in-person voting as well. So get out and vote if you haven't done that yet. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll have Rachel lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thanks, Rachel. You did a great job. All right, we're going to just open it right up to Chuck and Levi to talk about the flood mitigation and everything that has to do with flooding. So just let's get going. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. With me tonight is Deedar Charles, who's our assistant city engineer for GIS, and she's going to help run the machine tonight because we've got some new software we're breaking in. So hopefully it'll be useful for telling some of the stories we want to tell. So this is a workshop. We appreciate you taking the time. We've been looking forward, staff has been looking forward to this to kind of let you know what we've been doing since last we talked about flooding, and to get some direction from you, or at least the beginning of direction on where you want us to go. Next. So just to briefly go over the agenda items we have planned for tonight. I've talked about the workshop purpose. We'll provide a status report on the August 20th flooding. We'll discuss potential concept flood mitigate alternatives, and we'll discuss next steps. That's kind of the overview and the status reports. Levi's going to tell us what Public Works has been doing for cleanup. And you'll have the opportunity to let us know what she'd like to. We'll drop back in engineering and we'll talk about damage submittal status. And then kind of get into the meat of, besides the cleanup and the closures, what's the possible next steps are going to be. And that's what we'll really want to try and tell the story to council, what, could be, and then we'll try and give you on the path of where you'll tell us where you want us to be. And that'll take probably the full 2 hours when we did a dry run on this. So we'll try and be brief, but at the same time, this is our opportunity to share as much information as we can with you. So we're going to do that. And with that, I turn it over to Levi.
This picture here was the pedestrian bridge west, one or south. That last flood that came through, the first one on August 20th, completely washed out both abutments. The debris dammed up under the bridge, washed up those abutments, which flooded Roars and Taylor's property along 500 West and Center Street. So in that area on the Trail Bridge, the crews hauled out 75 tons of hauled in 75 tons of rock to help rebuild those where it broke through and threatened those properties. They've hauled out 120 tons of debris, sand, sediment, rock, trees. That path has several areas. I walked it today. It has several areas that need to be. There's a couple of routes crossing the path that need to be filled in. The worst of it isn't until you get to the footpath by 500 West. Most of it's sand, and it's kind of soft. I ran into close to a dozen people this afternoon. Half of them expressed that they travel to walk their dogs in there daily, so it's getting utilized. We need to do something about fixing it. For the storm drain, the storm came down, buried the storm drain that comes from Secret Cove. They spent 26 hours recovering and cleaning that. It consists of the sewer department using their back truck and the parks department, their labor. Estimated 100 hours. We still need to get in there to clean out that storm drain. Ag Boulevard, the storm drain that comes underneath the bottom of the road right there by the highway, has so much sand and sediment come down that it clogged it off filled up that catch and over top the road. They've hauled out 8 tons, spent 100 hours, and roughly that's maybe 300 more tons and 150 more hours to go. That go back. Sorry, that picture on the right is that storm drain inlet just below it. 300 South Mill Creek Bridge. They've hauled 60 tons of debris, spent 80 hours, estimating 120 more hours. And there needs to be repairs made to the handrail on the bridge, that crosses the bridge. There's an area we call the Frog Pond that's up on top of, up above the golf course. We have some city property and catch basin up there. They've hauled out 450 tons of debris, spent 100 hours, and almost double that before they're finished. The White Steels Park on 100 East. They so hard to spend 60 hours rebuilding the street drain. The flood filled up the drain at the end of that road, so we had to rebuild that drain. We're waiting for that debris, that sediment on the road to completely dry out before we haul it off. One of the issues we're going to run into that streets in such bad shape, we're going to pull asphalt when we haul that debris off. So we're going to have to rebuild parts of that road after we're done cleaning it. 400 East Bridge abutments. The storm washed away a lot of the riprap and rock that was securing those areas. We hauled 45 tons on one side, 50 tons on the other. Spent several hours moving those rocks into place to protect those abutments. Projects we haven't got to yet is 500 West Bridge. Like I said, I walked the trail here. The worst part of that trail is right there on 500 West, below the bike skills, the slack line, that pedestrian bridge. That's just an estimate, 500 hours and 600 tons of debris to remove that in that area. Another area we haven't been able to get to is Main Street Bridge. And part of that is we utilize a concrete path across the street from Zach's right there on 100 South. And we can't get our equipment down in there because the trail is undermined. So we got to rebuild the trail before we can get in there. What we're looking at when we do is right now there's 4 to 5 feet of sediment sitting above the trail, where prior to the storm, the original creek bottom was 2 to 3 feet below the footpath. So there's a lot of debris we still need to get out of there. There's a picture under the bridge that shows that debris. Team Rubicon, we had the opportunity to work with them. They started east of Creek Bridge on Mill Creek, and we're able to get a lot of debris, a lot of trees. They piled it, and we're gonna have to we have to go in and remove it. Estimate 100 hours to haul off that debris. We still have close to close to a dozen trees that have fallen or are getting ready to fall across the creek that we need to go in and take care of. Our street sweeper has aged a little bit, or is going on 7 years old. It's been down the majority of the time that we've been doing cleanup. We've been able to utilize it 110 hours. We estimate 120 more. The issue we're having is the brooms are failing, so they have to replace those electrical components that operate those brooms. We're currently in the process of buying them. Working with the streets, have been working with the parks. The streets department has so far accumulated 930 hours towards this cleanup. The parks department's 400, and debris, an impressive 400 or 4,000 tons, where the parks have helped out hauling off trees, roughly 40 tons. And that's not including what we have left to do. tallying up so far.
No, and major damage to the park, on the parkway from the underpass.
Okay, Levi, thanks. So now we'll move over and talk about the flood mitigation alternatives analysis. And we've got multiple things we'd like to talk about here, and start with the flood data overview of the 20th of August flood. And just as a reminder, the flow rate and the flood frequency, the USGS has published that they think it was about a 5,700 CFS, which is about the 50-year flood. And based on our analysis, we think it's closer to 7,000, which is closer to the 100-year flood. And part of that's the difference between they did their analysis higher up in the watershed, whereas we did ours here in town and accounted for breakouts and things like that. So we're kind of consistent between the two numbers. State of Utah National Weather Service, they're estimating that we had between 1.75 and 2 inches in an hour during that night of the 20th, which is the 100-year event. So it was a big flood by any metric. I mean, when Levi's talked about the damages, and those of us who were here, you know, we saw it, but it was just even these numbers tell you it was a big flood. So next, please. Here, I want to slow down, and I want to set the stage, and I hope you understand why I want to do that, because I want to try and make a point to it. So this photo on the left is from 1950, and that red square is the intersection of 400 North and 500 West. And you can see that to the north, heading up is north, it's still ag lands. And even to the southwest, it's still ag lands. And the main city center is over to the right. And interestingly, this populated city was away from the wetlands, away from the swamps, put it up against the cliffs where the cleaner water is, and away from the mosquitoes. I mean, that's where the residents chose to live. Now, if we go to the next, over to 2021, you can see there's that same red square, that 500 West, 400 North, and to the north it's developed with homes, especially to the northeast and directly up, and to the southwest. So the city grows and has been growing over time, and you can see with these aerial photos, just give you an idea that how things change over time. You've heard me talk about snapshots in time, and I think about things like that a lot, and where we're at in our snapshot of time. So if we go next, Vidar. So here's just a current 2022 picture of the overview of the city. And what we've turned on there is the two creeks. So Pack Creek coming in from on the southerly side, Mill Creek is the northern one. The total length of the two creeks, turn the city limits on, please. Yeah. So there's our, inside the red is the Moab city limits, which is what we're concerned with, right? Primarily from a jurisdictional and regulatory standpoint. So within the city, we have 6.2 miles of creek corridors, broken out by Mill Creek by 3.3 miles, Pack Creek 2.5 miles, Mill Creek after the confluence where they joined about 0.4 miles down to the river. And I just want to show you that because there's two major drainage corridors that cut across our city limits. So we have ways that we use those corridors in the past, the ways we use them today, and maybe we have to think about how we use them in the future. Next. So in the city, we have roads. This is our Class C roads list. So if you'll recall, we have about 26.8 miles of paved roads in the city. And you can see that those paved roads cut across those drainage corridors. And with that, we also have utilities. Yeah, so here's our culinary water. We have about 50 miles of water distribution pipe that we have in the city, and again, it cuts across the drainage corridors. The green is the Sanitary sewer, we have about 30 miles of sewer main in the city. It cuts across the drainage corridors. Storm drain, it's harder to see, so we won't spend time on that. We have about 18 miles of storm drain corridors. And on the, you're going to show the bridges now? Yeah. So as you can see, oops, there we go. You want to zoom in, Dieter, on something? Yeah, there's the one of the bridges. We have, where's the note? 19 bridges, is that the notes on there between the pedestrian and the road bridges that cross those two creeks. Yeah, there you go. We also have the shared use path, which was that pink. The pink there kind of represents the paved portion of the shared use path, which is in the drainage corridor. We have the brown. Do you have the shared use there below? Is that turned on?
Yes.
Yeah, you can zoom out some now. Yeah, there you go. That's the dirt part of the path. So the corridor is used, for recreation / transportation, as well as it's crossed by our infrastructure, roads, utilities. One of the things we did as we were trying to evaluate, well, what's next in terms of flood mitigation is we made a buffer, a 150-foot creek buffer. So that represents an arbitrary distance, 150 feet on either side of the creek through the city limits, with the idea being how many parcels are impacted by that corridor, by that drainage corridor. And the answer is it's 275 parcels cross the creek within 300 feet across within our city limits. So that's a lot of private property that we don't have easements to, not that we should, but if we were to need some easements, that's potential to impact a lot of private properties. And they're impacted by it now because it runs through those private properties. And the yellow just represents an extension of those parcels. Like one of them's the school there. They're not all private. The school cuts across the creeks as well. Okay, next. How about let's go to the bridges again. Turn off all that other stuff. Down. There you go. So with the bridges, we'll talk more about easements and such in the next part of the presentation, but we wanted to point out the number of vehicular and pedestrian bridges. Flood zones, if you would show the flood zone, please. Yeah. These are the FEMA flood maps that run on. We have 3 drainages that we have FEMA floodplains in the city: Pack Creek, Mill Creek, and the Colorado River. And that's it. It's only those 3 drainages are mapped FEMA floodplains. And those are the yellow is a 500-year floodplain. You can see how much of that northern part of the city is in the 500-year floodplain. The dark red is floodway. The purplish is floodplains. The blue and the purple are floodplains, which are different. We can have a work session on that if you guys ever want to, about what the different flood maps mean and what they mean to people who live there and what they mean to us because we regulate those. We have a city ordinance that we regulate FEMA floodplains, which allows us to participate in the FEMA our residents to participate in the FEMA flood insurance program because we're a member community. It makes us eligible for disaster funding if we meet other criteria. Communities that are not members of the FEMA program may not be eligible. They can just get kicked out. Like we've applied for FEMA funding. If you get kicked out if we weren't a member of the community, it's one of the first boxes they check. And we are. So that's good news. Okay. So city parks. Yeah, let's look at city parks. I said the recreation and transportation, we use the drainage corridors. You can see the Dieter, what's that? Rotary Park right there. And you go down here is like still Sprawling Rock. Yep. So we use the corridors for multiple purposes now. And something I just wanted to point out, I thought this was valuable in terms of just realizing the perspective of where those drainage corridors sit within our city and how the drainage corridors impact things that we do as a city and how the things that we do as a city impact those corridors, whether it's transportation or recreation, vehicles or utilities. So it's part of it. It's kind of a big picture thing that as we, and we were made aware of that during the August 20th flooding because we had two water lines that were destroyed and we've had temporary repairs on them, just as one example. Okay, thanks, Dieter. Let's go up to the next section. Shifting gears a little bit, just wanted to give you the quick update on the damage submittal status. Within 2 weeks, we made application to FEMA. That was the deadline we were given. And by the way, today is 81 days from the date of the August 20th event, and we haven't heard back from anything definitive from anyone, although I'm weekly contacting them and asking them for an answer. FEMA, we submitted $4.4 million. The state of Utah did declare a disaster and submitted Moab and Grand County and Wayne County as a package to the president on October 19th. And we haven't heard anything back except that we know that FEMA received the package. But I guess they've been busy in Washington. Federal Highway Administration, I've been working closely with them because if we have federally designated roads, which we have in Moab, which are collectors and arterials, those roads are eligible for what they call emergency relief during a disaster like this. And those roads are 300 south, 500 west, 400 east, etc. I can show you those, but the funding that we're potentially eligible for them is $3.3 million. Then here's an example of 300 south. Okay, next. Natural Resource Conservation Service, they have the Emergency Watershed Protection Act, which we had them found do a damage survey. They're the folks who are helping us from the Pack Creek floods of August of 21. And we're now in the queue with them with floods of 21 and floods of 22. We've agreed that that's how we're kind of keep them separate because otherwise it just becomes all the flooding. And potentially they could cover $2.8 million worth of damage to our public infrastructure. And then the last is the insurance trust. And potentially the same amount of, we submitted to them the same amount of damages that we submitted to FEMA. The question is what's covered under our policy. Now we've reviewed the policy and they've reviewed the policy. There's a lot of things that are covered, but there seems to be some things that might not be covered. I think it's primarily the parks and trails, but they're not sure yet. They've told me that. And I was corresponding with them today and they're hoping to have us an answer soon. But we don't have an answer from any of them, so that's why we're proceeding. And by the way, all of them have said, I've asked the question, look, we have emergency repairs that we need to have done now in case another event comes along. Even if it's not as big as that August 20th event, but one that's half as bad. Some of our bridges are in jeopardy because the riprap's been washed away. Levi and his crews and the 4 days after the August 20th, when that last big system came through, we jammed to get rock around some of the bridges that had the water lines. And it helped during those events. But we're pursuing trying to get rock to strengthen those bridges prior to finding out about money from those people. And they've all said probably the emergency repairs are coverable. But I thought they made a good point. It's like, because I said, are you going to cover them or not? They said, well, does it matter if we cover them? If you need to do them, you ought to do them. And I thought about that. And those water lines over the bridges, we need to get those Levi'd agree with me that we need to get those permanently repaired. Get them off the bridges so they don't freeze, so they're not vandalized or whatever. And so may have signed a contract this week, I think, to make that happen, to get that, but that's a 6-week thing. Hopefully by the first year around that will be done, and then it'll be a recoverable expense, at least most of it, when we do get some information from FEMA or the insurance trust. But that's the status of all those. And, wish I could tell you more definitive answers, but it's been kind of a hurry up and wait. And what we do, like Levi's keeping the cleanup going, we've been trying to keep the emergency repairs going the best we can. Next, Peter. So here I'd like to take a second. I appreciate your patience and fall back and talk now about what we might want to do, at least some ideas about it. I'm not suggesting what we should do, except at the very end, I would suggest we do it if council is interested in it. But when you do flood mitigation, meaning repairs after flooding events, or we have engineers and hydrologists. We go through this process of evaluating how we might address that, because it's not one size fits all. And we know that nobody wants to go out and pave paradise, so that's not an option. But we also know that not doing structural measures in certain places means you either have to acquire more land and let the river just go back and forth, or you can do some combination, like ordering off the a la carte menu, to be perfectly honest with you, to come up with a plan to address some of this. And so that's what I've laid it out there. So no action, and hang on, Dieter, it's no action is one of the alternatives we always look at, and I'll explain that in a minute, what I mean by that. And then there are structural alternatives, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Then there are non-structural alternatives, which are not as definitive. There are things that we can do from a regulatory standpoint that'll help protect flood damages and people. And then there's a process for doing that, for action. No action, there's not a lot of process. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to just go back to what we were doing. It's a legitimate action, but it's a question of if that's what council wants to do or not. At some point, staff is looking for direction so we can do what y'all think's best. And we'll help you make that decision any way you want us to. And we're trying to help now by giving you information. So what I mean specifically by no action or return to where we were is, so repairs to infrastructure to the level the system was at just prior to the August 20th flood. Federal or insurance funds will be used for this if and as they are available. So we would go back and try and protect the bridges. We would go back and repair the sidewalks. We'd go back and repair the handrails, reestablish the trails where they were at to the best of our abilities. That's no action in this particular case. If the funding, because we think some of the funding is going to come available, whether it's FEMA or the insurance, some funding will come through. Now, the federal funds, as I've mentioned before, come with a 25% local cost share, so it's not free money, but it's money that can be used for these type of activities, because that's what they do, is repair damages. And I'm suggesting that at a minimum, if council elects ultimately to go with the no action, we should acquire sufficient upstream and downstream easements at our bridges to replace and augment stream stabilization and provide access for regular maintenance. Let's show this one, Dieter. So here's an aerial view again, and those are bridges. And Mark has gone through and evaluated where we own property. Like those two central bridges there, we own the property, so no easements are needed to be acquired to do stream bank stabilization and get maintenance to them. We could do what we want, permitting allowed. But over there, the Mill Creek Bridge near Sand Flats, we don't own that purple area. That's private property right now. We would need to acquire easements there in order to go 100 feet up and down from there, stabilize the stream bank, the stream bottom. Whole intention is to protect the bridge but it also lets our equipment get in to maintain it. Right now, we're kind of at the whim of the people who, when we do need to get in there, we have to go to the property owner and go, we'd like to come in and do some grading. And we have good relationships. Levi's pretty good with people, but it's always, well, okay, but, you know, we don't go in and go 100 feet, we go in and go 10 feet. You know, and that's honestly just not enough. It's been on my radar screen since I got here to try and address this, but Mill Creek up there at 400 East, there's a series of easements that previous staff and council put together on the upstream side, except for that little purple area, but on the downstream side, not so much. And anyway, we've evaluated all of the vehicular bridges, and it comes to 2 acres total. If we got 100 feet up and downstream, and the width that we need to of those structures would be the acquisition of a total of 2 acres of property. And then item number 3 under the no action alternative is no channel work undertaken. By that, I mean no excavation, permanent, no stabilization, permanent, except as needed to reestablish the infrastructure to protect the hard infrastructure, which is bridges and sidewalks. So taking it back to where we were pre-flood. So hopefully that makes sense about the no action, return to where we were. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. Some of these are more well thought out than others, and some of these I'll say I think it's not a bad idea. Others I'll say it's just an idea that we would go through in the process of evaluating, not asking you to make decisions on any one of these, but just giving you some examples. So first one thing that we might could do is at the 300 South Twin Cell box culvert, which is over there by the Bark Park. Replace the twin cell box culvert at 300 South. It has less capacity than the other bridges in our system. With a true bridge, not a box culvert, that would have greater capacity to move water before overtopping. And I'd like to show you some photos that DDAR found. This is from 2022, the upstream side. You can see where we had the piers. This is, next photo is 98. That's the downstream side of 22. Here's 1998, the upstream side. So you see the same debris piled upon that center pier. And then the next photo I think is even more interesting. 98, same thing, but this is the one that I found, 1975. And that's looking at that box culvert from the upstream side. And you can see that it would overtopped on this same top place. And then you see all the mud and debris there. So this is big, this has been going on for 47 years, and it's almost like the definition of deja vu all over again. Because at the same locations, there's a constriction that I'll talk about in a minute. Next, please. Another option. We have this constriction and it's outlined in orange there, and we're looking at it. The lower end is 300 South, and then it goes up through the Bike Skills Park there. It's number 5, down past Woody's Tavern to 100 West, the pedestrian bridge. That's about 2,000 feet, and that's where damages recur repeatedly over the last 50 years because it's constricted. That's the most man-made and controlled portion and hardened portion of the creek. So one thought is, rather than go in and try and buy all those properties out to make it a larger cross section, install a large storm drain from 300 South under the creek to 100 West. And what that would do would be take storm flows. It wouldn't take the base flows in the creek. Those would stay in the creek as an amenity running through like it does today. But when the storms come, it would go into the 8-foot box culvert, pipe, and come out down below on 100 West. And we now have 7 and 8 foot pipes under the new storm drain system that UDOT put in with the highway widening. So while it sounds like a big pipe, we have in the city, UDOT maintains that one. Again, not saying it's the right idea, but it would be one of the menu items that could be evaluated when coming up with alternatives to trying to figure out how to address the damages that occur in this stretch of the creek corridor, Mill Creek. Next. 500 West. So we want to maximize conveyance under our roadway bridges by returning the channel depth to where they were designed to be. That would maximize the amount of water that can go under the bridge as opposed to backing up at the bridges because they're constricted with debris and silt during a flooding event. Because small floods will leave that deposition there, and if it's not pulled out, it's not opened up for when the bigger floods come along. So could you show that picture there? Yeah. This is 500 West Bridge, and from the bottom of that girder, from the bottom of those pier caps, those piers are 20 feet deep, and the channel bottom is supposed to be 13 feet deep. And you can see how filled in that is with mud, debris. That's what Levi was talking earlier about. I don't know, 400 or 500 hours or something if his crews went in there to open up that channel section. But those channel sections need to not only be opened up, they need to be stabilized with riprap. So we maintain the conveyance, which is the word for how much the opening is there, so the flood waters can go through and the debris. But also, if maintains the vertical elevations in the creek, and they're vertical grade control structures, what they're called, all along those creeks that I think were there as leftovers from some of the irrigation projects. But the creeks already have, and some of them were destroyed in this flood. Next. One idea, again, these are just thoughts, raise the Parkway Trail to the overbank from the channel bottom. This would minimize risk of users being caught in a flash flood and reduce the cost of rebuilding sidewalks and trails after a flood if they were elevated. I don't know what you have for pictures. Yeah, so that was a tree that fell across. Yeah, this is 98. Yeah, this is 1998. This is across from Woody's by 75. There, sorry. Yeah, we didn't have time to label them all. But that's the section, by El Tapatio and across from Woody's where we had damage, where we showed you earlier photos of in that exact same section of the sidewalk. In fact, you can see that at the bottom right of this picture, the rock and concrete, someone had tried to protect it from being undermined. Well, that stuff is long gone, I don't know, decades ago, but those sections of that sidewalk were undermined during the 2022 floods. So this one I said earlier, this area between 300 South and 100 West is the hardest to control because it's so narrow. That's just examples of it since 1975. And that's just one thought. I'm not saying that's the answer, raise the trail, but it's things to think about, right? Install a raised levee near the Bike Skills Park. One of the things that happened right there is during the August event, water jumped out into 100 East, and that's what came out and hit Dewey's and turned on 300 South and went down to Main Street, then on to Williams Way and all that stuff. That's where it jumped. It jumped at the 300 South Bridge. So some of it went down 300 South, then the rest of it jumped out there. So one opportunity would be to put in a levee there where the path would, if the path stayed where it is, would come gently up and over at about 4, 5, 6 feet. And that would prevent water from jumping out 100 East. But when you do that in an event like we just had in August, it keeps all the water in the channel. So that now instead of going out 100 East, it's pointed downstream towards Mill Creek and the Tapatio wall and Woody's. And so you have to make sure that that's hardened to accept those flows, if that's one of the. So it's all intertwined. Next, please. Now this one, again, we're just to remind ourselves, this is kind of a brainstorming thing, but these are commonly used tools in the business. So one opportunity under structural, we're still under structural, is establish, construct, and manage the creeks through Moab as a drainage system, not just as a recreational and transportation system. So somehow try and figure out how to incorporate the recreation elements, because it certainly has them. I mean, it's a perennial stream most of the time. We've got sidewalks through there. People use them on a daily basis and they recreate. But also when we have flooding, as you can see, damages occur not just in the creek corridor, but outside of it when it jumps this creek bottom. So the way you could do that would be to choose a design frequency of protection. 10-year flood, 50-year flood, 25-year flood. And you do that after, analysis of those various ones and say, well, what does this mean here? How wide would the channel be? How deep would the channel be? Construct a channel system to the chosen frequency. Channel will be hardened near structures. And by structures, again, I mean bridges and other select locations. We have people who live right at the edge of the creek who were there pre-ordinance. And maybe those are places where you'd consider hardening to protect structures. As well as, we jumped Mill Creek up by the irrigation dam during this August 20th flood, and Mill Creek Drive was shut down. It was 3 or 4 feet of water there. Maybe there needs to be hardening there. But in other places, what engineers call softer treatments. Channel shaping, vegetation, bioengineering would be used, so to maintain the aesthetic, both from a recreation and a fully functioning stream. And as an example, we did a couple of quick cross sections. This is what happened on one of the cross sections up by the irrigation dam in August 20th. The floodwaters were 200 to 300 feet over the banks, and closed Mill Creek Drive through there. So this is kind of a real cross section, and we've calculated where that is. But this is not far from there, further downstream. One idea would be if we armored the sides, because this is a location near a bridge, with riprap, revetment to be determined, some type of armoring, 2 to 1 side slopes, maintain a 25-foot bottom width that would be filled with vegetation, probably not trees, because we don't want the trees to be growing there and then wiped out during the next flood and carried downstream. But then on the overbank, we've talked about this, put trees in the overbank, the floodplain. And we showed the trail up above, maybe not relocate the existing trail, but if we were to do this in the new places, maybe as much as possible, keep it out of the channel bottom so that it doesn't get destroyed when the floods come along, right? And people aren't at risk because they're on the overbank, not on the bottom of the channel. Again, that's one potential cross section, not to say it's the cross section, but in the tools of evaluating structural modification, that's one of them you would look at in place. And almost done with structural. Site, build, and maintain upstream detention or debris basins. Detention basins are designed to capture the flows on the upstream end in a large basin, and then have a small outlet that meters the flow that goes downstream. The stream flows longer over time, like it might take 36 or 48 hours for that debris base or detention basin to drain, but it doesn't all come whoosh. We don't get 7,000 CFS if you're designing for that type of stuff. To meter the flows. And I think that the best way I've always tried to explain it is think about the bathtub. If you fill up your bathtub and pull the plug at the bottom, it takes a while to drain because the outlet is so small. Whereas if the outlet were this big, that bathtub would drain more quickly, right? So the idea of the detention basin is it meters the flows. So if you do that, you could maintain flows during a flood, but you might not do as many structural improvements downstream. That's one of the advantages. So the channels downstream might not be as wide. And also they are debris basins, and which is the tricky part of it, because sometimes the debris gets so much that it overwhelms the basin. And then, but this is an example, right? Dieter, that picture that you're showing up there. Yeah, that's the debris. That's the new storm drain system from the highway widening we participated in, from Stewart Canyon, collecting and such. That's the outlet right there under that rock riprap. It's like a 7-foot pipe and goes down into a series of debris basins that over time Levi's crews have got to go in there and pull that silt and sediment out so that it doesn't go further downstream. So we're using them, but on a smaller basis over in this side of town. Next. And then there's other tools out there, levees, flood walls, grade control structures, culverts, storm drains. We can keep moving, Dieter. Yeah, that's just a picture of them. Now talk about non-structural. So this isn't concrete or riprap or excavation. These are tools we could use from a regulatory and administration management process to help us deal with floods. I've mentioned it before to you, we implement a real-time flood warning system. This involves precipitation and stream flow gauges. You know, during the floods, I'm always looking at the USGS gauges, but they're not really there for flood purposes. They're there for water purposes. And then one up at Mill Creek maxes out at 1100 CFS. So real quick, because I know I showed you some of you this before. Pima County has one, Denver has one. You know, this is Tucson in the mountains to the north of the Catalinas, for any of you who have been there. There's rainfall gauges. Click on a rainfall gauge if you would, Dieter, and it'll show you rainfall. Yeah, so in the last 30 days, they've had 0.2 CFS flowing in that wash. Bear Canyon wash, you know, it'll tell you depth of flow during event. Doesn't look like they're having an event up there by Cortera, 250 CFS. I don't know if you see it, but anyway, it's downstream from their wastewater treatment plant. I know that they dump it out of the treatment plant into the Santa Cruz River, so you can monitor those flows. But the biggest point is all those flows coming off the Catalinas and from the south, because the Santa Cruz runs north, you can evaluate in real time. And this is outward facing, so the public could have the same access to this as staff and the legislature and you guys would, so that it's used to forecast emergencies as well as useful during emergencies. What's it doing at Windy Point Vista? I don't know, over at Catalina Foot. I mean, we do that now, but we do it with radios and flashlights, to be perfectly honest with you, which some of it works. Okay, thanks. Next. We could update our floodplain management damage prevention ordinance. You know, we have essentially the minimum ordinance that FEMA will approve. So there are lots of things that local communities do in addition to the minimum required to be members of the NFIP. And one of them that's typically done is increase the finished floor elevation to be 1 foot above 100-year base flood elevation. So right now, you know, like when this development was made, this is downstream of 300 South. Those apartments in the background, that's all floodplain. They were required that the finished floor of the downstairs had to be at the 100-year water surface elevation. A lot of communities, Grant County, in fact, they say, no, that's not good enough. We want to put a foot of freeboard on there. And freeboard is just to account for things like wave action, wind, and also the uncertainties in all this flooding business, hydrology and hydraulics. But that's one of the things we could do. Again, not saying we should do it, but it's one of the things that we could do that would increase flood protection for future people in the floodplain. Another thing that's typically done is an erosion setback from the banks of the creek. And if you look, Dieter, if you can pull that text down, yeah, thanks. This is a good picture. That cut bank there is eroded. This is downstream again of 300 South, almost to that fence. And that fence was installed right at the floodway. So between the floodway and the floodplain, and if we had a erosion setback ordinance of say 20 feet, or that fence would be, in all improvements, would be 20 feet further back to account for erosion during flood events. A lot of communities have a voluntary flood-prone land acquisition program, allow the city to purchase or accept floodplain lands from private owners who no longer want to own property in the floodplain. I don't know about all of our history clearly, but it looks like we've done a lot of that. I mean, most of the property the city owns, except for the golf course, is down in the floodplain or floodway. And I don't know if we bought it or people just approached us and gave it to us, or we traded. But that's where the creeks are, and the recreation and the trails are. So that's another thing that we could do. And then lastly, for non-structural vegetation and restoration along the Mill Creek and Pack Creek corridors would be evaluated to figure out how that interacts with the structural modifications or the non-structural modifications. And how you do that, excuse me, almost done, I promise. Next, please. There's a potential decision-making process if we don't choose no action. If we do no action, we don't need to do all this other stuff. But if council chooses action and some variation on some of those things or wants to come up with, it's called the Corridor Drainage Master Plan. And what it considers, and it's a tool that's used throughout the West. I know I've done, I'm not sure about in the East. I suspect they do. I know that in the Northwest they do. It considers structural and non-structural measures as a part of the process for doing one of these plans. You can consider alternatives, analysis, and evaluation. So typically how we do that, it's kind of like how we did dispersed parking. You know, we got to 30% plans a couple of times. We came to council and said, what do you think? We think we're here. And you all said, oh, how about doing this and doing that? And we were able to go back and evaluate it. And a lot of it worked. And we consider private and public property impacts. I showed you how many potentially private properties could be impacted in that 300-foot corridor. Not that 300 foot's a magic number. It was just to show that there's a lot of parcels in those corridors. Obviously, that includes public engagement. Regulatory permitting, I haven't talked about that, but those are waters of the U.S. Those are perennial streams, Mill Creek and Pat Creek. And for us to do major activities, we have to get a stream alteration and 404 permits, not to mention permit ourselves through the NFIP. So that's considered, you know, what are the costs, what are the implications, what are the requirements? Recreational trail considerations, because again, it's part of what they are now, costs and a timeline. So that's, and then if there's someone else has another idea to do it, it may be out there, but in my experience, go back up a little bit, please, Peter, just a little, yeah. That's the way, if you don't want to go with a no action alternative, to come to some kind of a decision on what you want to do in the future. If you want to mitigate, I know you want to mitigate flooding, but you know, damages and to what level we want to do that. And one of the reasons Carly and I, you know, Carly, feel free to correct me, but yeah, I think we're in agreement that in this time of climate change, we don't know how often these kind of storms will come in. You know, I mean, these high intensity storms that, you know, in my 5 years, I've never saw a storm that big, but we saw a bunch of them in the last 2 years that weren't big. They weren't that big. Well, we saw they happened in 75. And, you know, some of you folks have lived here or were born here. You've seen some of those, but I don't know that they're all that big, but there's nothing to say they won't come back again. And if we want to prepare for them, this sets the path that would let us determine how you want to prepare for them. So with that, I appreciate your patience on letting me go through that. I know it was a lot me talking, but I think there was a lot of information there. Hopefully you feel that we'd all be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah. Can I just clarify? Our recommendation is that we do pursue this drainage corridor master planning effort, so we can come up with some sort of a suite of these options to determine which is going to be best tailored to solve this problem. So it'd be considering our financial capability, the public engagement, the recreational use of that area, the drainage use, the transportation use of that area. But at this moment, I don't think we can say, hey, this is the one little fix that will prevent it from happening again. It's such a big problem that it's going to require a lot of time to plan and a lot of effort to implement.
Great, thanks. All right, council. Questions for Chuck Levi, Carly, Annie? Taylor?
Do you have any sense if the recent flooding changed the boundaries of any of the flood zones, like especially near the creeks?
So we did nothing, absolutely nothing. We could go back and redo the hydraulics. The hydrology, FEMA wouldn't want us to redo the amount of water that's in the 100-year flood, you know, the 8,000 CFS.
Yeah.
But yeah, we probably should go back if we're not going to do anything. If we're just saying this is the way it is, and then refly it, so we could do no hydraulics and then go through the FEMA process and make those 100-year floodplains more accurate. The reason I say that, is that if we decide to, go for the plan, which could be done in a year, and then, okay, now we know we're gonna implement, it might be not, we do money after we built part of the plan, then we do the remapping. That's typically how you do it, as opposed to interim mapping. You know, we wouldn't want to spend that money.
Mhm. But for, say, someone was in that interim time period, a property owner wanted to develop their land. And so they would be relying on the existing mapping, but potentially the boundaries of the flood zones could have changed.
The quickest to get a total map redone would be 18 months, 12 to 18 months. If we said, here's a 1,000-foot section of the river that was kind of really moved around, we might get a letter of map revision done in 6 months. So that would be the way to, so if someone had a specific piece of land that they were concerned about, potentially they could do a letter of map revision for just that section of the 100-year floodplain. Wouldn't have to do all of it. Wouldn't do all of it. That's a longer process and certainly more expensive.
Okay. And then I'm just wondering what level of confidence you have in hardened measures surviving these scales of floods, and I just ask because it seems like they could get buried in sediment, or like down at the bottom end of Mill Creek where the natural gas line goes underneath the creek, or there was some concrete reinforcement and it was just all torn up and the natural gas line exposed. And
Yeah. So the answer to that is, if we build it, we must maintain it. And that's why one of the reasons I put in there that if we do the no action alternative, that includes going and getting those easements for those bridges. I have confidence that we could strengthen those bridges. They were that close, some of those bridges, to losing them. But there was some structural, there was some riprap there on all those bridges, and a lot of it's gone now. So we survived that. And I have confidence that if we went back to that 100 feet either side, or even if we can't get the 100 feet, 80 feet on either side, you know, and put in a solid stream bank, a stabilization that was designed, bottom and sides, that we could maintain those structures. You know, in that flood comes again, it's gonna be, they should be fine. We shouldn't lose the bridges. You know, the worst thing that happens, like on that bridge below 100 West pedestrian bridge, is you lose the approaches. I mean, that happens a lot of times. Bridges are designed that way. Don't lose the structure, because the structure costs so much and takes so long to rebuild. But if you lose the approaches, our problem is we got utilities in those approaches, and we don't want to lose water, sewer, cable, electric in the approaches. So that's why in the 2 acres that we've identified there would be, you know, hold that. So I have a degree of confidence in structural measures if they're designed well. And the other thing, though, the flip side of it is, you know, all that sediment to push down as we live here in Moab in an erosive environment. You know, and some of those things that I think you're referencing down by the natural gas line, I went and looked at some of the stuff with TNC. Water got behind it, and just the soils are so soft and silty, they just washed right out. So sometimes you have to extend it and make those structures larger than what you think to take care of. You predict damages, but you just minimize those damages.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, I feel like I remember this being mentioned previously, and if we don't get those easements to access and kind of be able to maintain those things, are the private property owners required to maintain some of those like creek beds and everything? So they can just let them go and get worse. And
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the only reason to get those easements is for us to protect our structures. And then the property owners have the opportunity to do as they wish. I mean, within the rules of the feds and the state and us, but no, there's no way that requires those property owners to provide the stream bank stabilization for us.
okay. And then kind of been thinking as development continues throughout the city and Grand County and we lose like more permeable land, like would a similar event to this potentially have even worse consequences if like if the rainwater that falls within the valley can't absorb into the ground? Is there a chance that it would get?
Well, so if I follow your question, you're saying, will new development make a flood like this worse?
Yeah.
It shouldn't. And the reason for that is all new development has to comply with both the city of Moab, and ours is more restrictive than Grand County's detention ordinances.
Okay.
So all new development has to control their drainage and mitigate it so it's metered out of the system, like I was talking before. Interestingly, our detention ordinance is more restrictive than the counties, and their floodplain ordinance is more restrictive than our floodplain ordinance. So just
Yeah, and that was kind of gonna dovetails in with my last question, which is like, are there things that the county itself can do? Because since we are much more developed and kind of denser, it sounds like a lot of those mitigation measures are going to be more expensive and kind of like harder to implement. And if we can partner with the county to use some of their undeveloped lands to help kind of minimize the flow that reaches us, it can potentially help with our approach to kind of trying to mitigate future flood events.
so I think you're referencing upstream detention basins and debris basins, and we've so San Juan County is pushing for one in the Pack Creek drainage right now. I don't know if they'll be successful or not because it's either on city lands or on, I haven't seen the plan yet. It's either on city lands or on forest lands, and if it's on forest lands, they'll have a lot of NEPA stuff to go through. And we've had some staff level discussions about if we want to participate. And I said, well, sure, we want to know what you're doing. And with Grand County has talked about it too, but I don't think they have any definitive plans on the upstream detention basin. But yeah, so if we were to do the corridor master plan we're talking about, we would evaluate. Now, I made a big deal about showing in the city limits just how much we've got here, but we would evaluate outside the city limits for detention basin and debris basins. We wouldn't restrict our search for those to just in the city limits, because there may be a great place a quarter mile outside the city limits that everybody would be happy, and that would be a good thing. Yeah, so we would coordinate with them.
And it wouldn't be limited to just like the hard structural solutions. It'd be like, built infrastructure, green infrastructure, natural infrastructure, ordinances, regulations, policies, like the whole holistic kind of suite of alternatives.
All right.
If we weren't clear on that, but it would be ideas just like this. That would be really good.
Yeah, that's all the questions I have. Thank you for that presentation. And thank you for the format of it. I think it really helped kind of conceptualize a lot of the different things that are involved in trying to plan ahead for future events. But yeah, it's also kind of terrifying because that's a lot of work and it's going to be a lot of money to really be prepared for if something like this occurs again. But yeah, thanks. Definitely a lot to think about.
Jason.
So I was curious. Yeah, thanks for that format. I was like, wow, I want to learn how to do that. In 2009, there was the FEMA flood study that was done, and I know that like it's been a while since I've read it, a couple months, but I noticed that when I read it, it identified a lot of the places that failed during this flood, almost to a T and stuff. So, would it be valuable to go back to that study because things haven't changed? Now we're trying to implement a new study to start implementing things based on the 2009, FEMA, flood study to try to fix now before we go through this whole process of creating another document that's probably gonna say pretty close to what the 2009 document said. And so, we're getting 18 months before we get this thing done. And then it's going to be another year after that, where can we identify hotspots now and start working towards those based on the 2009 study that was done 13 years ago or whatever it was.
So the hydrology is the same. FEMA would tell us that the amount of water that's coming. And that's one of the reasons why the night of after the flood, I had a chance to look at the study and look at where the high water marks were and say with pretty good confidence that it was the 100-year flood. Because you're right, they predicted where the high water mark would be. And they predicted that the 300 South would overtop
Right.
in the 50-year flood. But the contours of the land have changed a lot. I mean, we showed that with that, those two slides I had where we showed the 100-year water surface elevation, maybe 200, 300. Down underneath the 500 West Bridge, there's places 6 to 8 feet of fill. So that's what I'm saying to you is the FEMA flood study is not really a recommendation to rebuild stuff. It's here's what the impacts to the 100-year flood were based on the 2009 topography. And they predicted it really well. I agree with you on several locations, but it doesn't tell us what to do. It says 300 South is under design. And if we accepted that, we could look at the suite of ways to get past 300. And I showed you a couple, but storm drain or build a new bridge. Maybe there's something else out there that we haven't thought about, but it doesn't really have a lot of process for us to get to that. And I hear what you're saying, which is don't create a new study when we've already got one on the shelf. But it's changed in terms of the ground surface has changed as a result of these floods. So we'd want to fly as part of this study and get detailed hydraulics that would lead us to detailed designs for structures that we'd have a confidence that they'd survive. Whereas that flood study we don't even have the topography that was flown with it. It was 4 foot contour interval, which is not design level. We would get half the design contour interval. I'm sorry to get technology, Jason, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I guess my feeling would be like if we do the study, great, let's get working on the study. But what are we going to do in the meantime to build up these levees, by the bike park so things don't go down? Do we need to start working on the 300 South Bridge right now? Because we know, since 1975, that it's been an issue, that we can start working on, designing a bridge that's adequate for what's going on. I just hate to see us being, 4 years out from this and we had run into the possibility of for the next 4 years, we have a 100-year flood, which we don't know, but if we do, the financial impacts and the impacts to citizens is going to be pretty big.
So that's an interesting question. Thinking about it, I hadn't thought about it that way before, but if we knew that we weren't going to get an upstream detention basin, which would reduce the flows into the system, if we knew we weren't going to get that because it's too much money, too much time, then I'd say, yeah, we probably could prioritize 300 South to 100 West because that's the constriction. And those treatments are going to be structural because otherwise we're going to buy $8 million worth of properties.
Right.
We did a quick number check on it. But everything upstream from there, you could take the process and look at revegetation, go through the process. But we could prioritize that down as long as we knew that. And the reason I say as long as we knew, but if we were pretty sure we weren't going to get the upstream detention basin, because if we got the upstream detention basin, that may meter the flows somewhat, where you wouldn't need such a hard, large set of improvements at that constricted zone. But I think that'd be worth further discussions and thought about that. It's because it's prioritizing the known bad actor and what solutions aren't going to work there. I think we could come to that solution pretty quick. Whereas the rest of the system, we could methodically look at structural, non-structural measures and come to good decisions because we went through the process of it.
Right.
The risk is just that it's a lot of money. Say it's like the 300 South Box Culvert. That's an expensive project, right? And
Sure.
it would probably be 4 years for us to even get that completed anyway. And we're spending a lot on a really expensive project and we don't know its efficacy compared to other projects. So it would be sort of all in, hoping that solved the problem and not without necessarily the more robust analysis that you would typically do when you're investing that amount of money.
Right. I'm just saying in the meantime,
Yeah.
building a levee at the bike skills park, doing, there's clearing out debris, in certain areas. We're gonna have to spend some money.
Yeah.
Just to mitigate the impacts of future flooding, and stuff. It's like, the bridge that's below Desert Bistro, that
Mhm.
if it plugs up and sends water over to those properties, is that Hidden Cove or wherever
Yep.
in there, kind of mitigating that stuff so that need to be done in the short time before we have a study that says, hey, you need to get this done. And we kind of-
And like the concern with like the levy at Bike Skills, it's just not so simple because it kind of influences the whole system. So it would just like the water would
does.
be now like shoving up against Woody's. So it's not just sort of like, we're just gonna put a levy here and it's in 100 East, it's gonna be fine now. It's like, well, we're gonna create these problems downstream.
So if we had the Woodies, and we've talked about this, if we had that Woodies project completed, which, we're 90% design right now. If that were hardened and below Main Street Bridge on the left, I don't know what that motel is called, sorry. It's not Gonzo, it's the other one.
Downtown Moab.
Yeah, I think.
The old Ramada.
I'm sorry. Yeah, they got damaged. If we could be, and maybe a little flood wall would work for them,
Right.
then I think that levy could do a lot of good. So when I said, oh, if we put the levy, that levy up at 100 East, as long as we take care of what impacts downstream, that would create, that could work. We just have to make sure that we don't make it worse down there. And I think once we got it past downtown Moab motel, we'd be fine with the treatments to the pedestrian bridges that we're talking about.
Yeah. Thanks for putting that together.
Yeah.
Great.
Ronnie, sorry. I know Ronnie has some questions. I would think that Ronnie would have some questions.
So I've just been writing some as we sit here, and then some people have been asking me questions. So just to make sure I cover them. So, you did touch on the fact, sometimes people wonder like, oh, why is that structure so close? Seems like it's right in the floodplain. And so I think you were saying, just if people are listening and wondering, obviously some of these structures were built before there was any kind of ordinance establishing any kind of distance with that. So in case that helps anybody understand that. So obviously, thanks. It's very helpful to have those numbers of tons of debris moved and staffing hours. So one of the questions I guess I had, and I also got from other people, was what has been the opportunity cost of doing that work? Obviously, we know the work needed to happen. It was important, but obviously probably there's other work that we haven't been able to get to as a result. And I'm just curious what we've had to put on the back burner. Yeah, while addressing all that.
We don't have any cost estimates. We will go back and convert those into wages and tell them the equipment. There's numerous areas we haven't got to yet. We've been prioritizing what we have so far. I think the next biggest project to try to concentrate on is Main Street. So we can hopefully open that back up soon. But that's gonna take some rebuilding of the trail.
Like Levi, what have your streets crews not been able to get to that they normally would be able to get to? Because they've been cleaning up the storm. Because it's been, full time for several weeks, and then maybe 50 to 70% of time. You have named the list of things we're not doing right now.
So everything, crews, 90% of their efforts have been towards flood cleanup. There's patches we haven't patched, there's paint we haven't done. We've been responding to citizens' complaints about signs or trees or whatever, but there's normal maintenance that we haven't done. We usually, all these catch basins, we've cleaned out right now. We haven't been able to do that. That's normal maintenance. We have flush and storm, but we haven't done anything.
Yeah.
Cleanup.
Because another question I got and one I had was, we have different basins, right? We have debris and detention and catch basins. And so I guess me and some other people had questions of how often, I mean, obviously, I guess it depends on the level of storm activity, but I mean, in a normal year, would we be cleaning those out once a year? I mean, what's considered good maintenance if one has the benefit of being able to get to it?
They're inspected regularly after each storm, obviously, and cleaned out on a regular basis as needed. They were behind on some of that maintenance over the last few years. They started catching up, and now they're behind.
Okay, and another question I got from some folks was, to what extent does the city responsible, this might all be the county, or I don't know if it's shared, are there any of these upstream, like on the hill slope, say above hillside, or, if you walk around in sand flats, you see some old ones in places. Are there any that we're supposed to be cleaning out upslope of some of those homes, or that's not us, or those are historic?
Yeah, those
Yeah.
are those old CCC basins that there's
Yeah,
37 of them or more in places. No, those did not reduce flood peaks that are large flood peaks. And they're so remote. I mean, we've looked at them. There was a while there where people were asking about those a lot. The only way to get to clean some of those basins would be either by helicopter or by mule. So we could, which is fine if we have people willing to use picks and shovels and ride mules and camp out at the top, but the benefit is minimal. And plus now we'd have to go back through the NEPA process, because almost every one of those is on BLM lands. So it's just about, we looked at all those during the stormwater master plan, as well as UDOT looked at it when we did the drainage for the highway widening. So it's just not a viable solution. It was something that was tried because labor was cheap back in the CCC days, and the city was much smaller.
okay, no, thanks for answering that, because I think it's just part of the overall picture that people wonder about. It's like the
Sure.
one component. And then so one of the questions with relation to what, Jason is raising, and I don't know how the other council members feel, but obviously a workshop like this, I find very useful as well. And this may just be my opinion, but to me, it's more like the beginning than the end. Like, I feel like I wouldn't have enough information or scope, today to say, okay, let's definitely do X or Y. I almost feel like this needs to be followed up with an open house or some kind of meeting with the public. It certainly draws on a lot of the expertise in our community, because we do have a lot of people, certainly if we think about the people who attend the MOP meetings, for people listening, that's the Moab Area Watershed Partnership. But I would hate to proceed in any particular direction without having a larger conversation and gleaning some ideas, because there probably is some low hanging fruit just on the community, or now because a lot of grant money out there, or just there's a lot of support for public-private partnerships, or just partnerships in general. And it does seem like there's capacity that we haven't yet discussed, because I think everybody loves and cares about these watersheds. Some people live on them and are more threatened probably immediately by fire and flood. But I think everybody appreciates them. And I do think there's a lot of potential for partnership to both help identify from what people are seeing on the ground are the largest danger areas, and then, mixing that in with, what we know scientifically and from engineering data. So for me, I need a little bit more information, and I would like some feedback from those groups. And, I'm sure we have people at the university too who are following some of this, but I would definitely like maybe another conversation in some kind of open forum where we can have some discussions about that, because I do think there is the long term and the short term, but it does seem like, just like when we've discussed, emergency response in the short term, right? If we have another big event, we want some quick way to notify each other, like, okay, crap is hitting the fan, and get out of the way if you want to stay safe. So just in the same respect, it seems like we need to find a way to partner as a valley, as local government, but also as community members, to try and maybe hit some of the key areas that need to be hit. Like, if you walk the drainage, and we all know, like, the way large rain cell events are happening now, it can be what happens can be very dependent on where things are falling. Like, I'm guessing a detention or debris basin by Pat Creek will be great if things drop above that. But, for an event where they drop below that, that one probably isn't going to matter as much. And walking a lot of the drainage, as you see, there's still, in certain places, maybe 50% of the trees are down. So in a large enough event, those are going to start moving too. So I would like a conversation with some overlap, and it doesn't have to be the only one, but I do feel like I need information where some of the flooding stuff overlaps with some of the fire stuff. Because it just seems like all of that is combining to impact what's happening in the drainages. So I would kind of like a big picture before I can hone in. And then another question I have for you guys is, where do you see, like we've been talking about maybe the need for a stormwater management plan, or I'm probably using the wrong word, but whatever plan, because we know our streets, right, move all our floodwaters, and the need to discuss, okay, well, long term, I don't know what other options we have, but we probably do need some kind of plan. Is that probably different from this corridor plan, right? But do you guys see those as overlapping, or should they be
So-
done at a similar time?
We have a stormwater management. plan.
Yeah, I think I'm using
That-
the wrong word. I don't know
Yeah,
if I'm thinking
but,
about,
but it
flood.
takes,
yeah, yeah,
I just walked in on, we adopted that like my first week.
Yeah.
Here, and
yeah,
it addresses most of the city, but not the drainage corridors.
yeah,
It's silent regarding Mill Creek and Pack Creek, and it talks about, improving 400 north as a matter, and some of the work that was done is the widening solved part of that, but there's still $8 to $12 million worth of projects on that stormwater master plan. But because we've had 2 years now of flooding
right,
along these corridors, Pack Creek was partially related to the fire, if not a lot related to the fire. Mill Creek, some, not so much. They were silent. So that's why we're proposing a drainage corridor master plan that would take care of those major drainages, because they're big, and still chip away at our stormwater master plan. Because right now we're just having a kickoff meeting next week to address updating our stormwater fees and implementing stormwater impact fees, because we don't have stormwater impact fees for new development to contribute. But that'll be 3 months out before we get it, but that at least will identify potential revenues to address either the corridors or the stormwater master plan.
so in terms of overlapping plans that one ideally has that are interacting, that's kind of the one. There probably aren't other ones that we just need to
Yeah,
widen our
I think
blinders
the
for.
stormwater master plan did a good job for addressing our urbanized issues where we have storm drains that need to be replaced or upgraded. And then if we do a corridor master plan, that'll take care of the other element of it, which is what's happening and hitting us big time coming off the BLM and the forest properties, because some of the other stuff's coming off over the rim. But we've addressed some of it, but not all. of it.
Yeah. And then, is there anything else that we should understand as a council about how other municipalities pay for this stuff, whether it's the planning component or the long-term payment? Because I know obviously you're supposed to collect a certain amount of money from your fees, but it seems like so often it's not enough for the long term. And I didn't know, it was great to have the summary of, where different pools of money could come for some of the damage we've incurred. But in terms of thinking about moving forward, is there anything else not on that list that we need to be thinking about aside from, these impact fees you mentioned? And
Yeah,
Wow.
so those are fees that we could generate. I
Yeah.
mean, Carly and I have had very preliminary discussions about special districts, and we're not saying that's an answer yet, but I've talked to the Department of Water Resources about getting planning money, and they say, well, it's typically something they don't do, but if that was the route that y'all wanted to go towards, I'd call them back and say, hey, we're serious now. We got hit by the flood. Can you help us some? I doubt they'd come up with all the money, but maybe they come up with $25,000 to help us do a $200,000 study, which is probably realistically what it is. So there are some sources out there. FEMA has a program that we're actually going to submit, but it's more of a scoping document that would take a year to get started, because they manage the project. They won't give us the money.
Okay.
We pay 25% cost share, and we wouldn't have a product for 2 years minimum, more like 3. And it's more to evaluate the upstream detention basins. They wouldn't, look at the stuff I was talking about, the corridor, the constriction corridor between 300 South and 100 West. They look at that. So we're actually gonna put in a grant application at the end of the month. And, there's no commitment. I mean, if we get it, then we'll come back to council and say, are you interested? If the terms are there, but there's not a lot of money for planning. There's some money, so we've been chasing it. And sometimes there's money for construction if you do the planning. If I answered the question, right?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Can you asked a question earlier that I don't think we got to address, Ronnie, about the sort of public component, this community is rich with expertise and input. That's what we're kind of recommending we do that's the approach we're proposing, which is, can we engage in this very public process? And, part of that would be a project scoping process where we talk to our partners, we talk to all the jurisdictions, experts here, as well as engineering consultants to start identifying what are the problems, what is the existing information about those problems, what are potential solutions, and start to evaluate alternatives to solve those kinds of problems. So I'm glad you mentioned it, Ronnie, because it's sort of a really widespread collaborative effort that we would have in mind. But and that's like step one of the planning process. And then it's iterative throughout the development of whatever the final product is.
Okay, but there's nothing saying that, if that planning process takes a year or two, that if you identify some things as you're having those conversations, that you couldn't just do those.
Well, and there are some that we are doing in terms of, what we're kind of talking about is like, what do we do to solve this problem in the like near and long term? So it's like 5 to 20 year project, because that's kind of the scale of the problem that we have. We know the climate modeling is saying we're going to get more precipitation, it's going to be rain, and it's going to be there all at once. So we know this is a problem that's going to emerge, it's going to get worse. So we have an opportunity here to do some initial planning for the near and long term so our community is prepared for it. And that's what we're talking about investing in. In the shorter term, we haven't talked about this yet because it's still being evaluated, but we're working with our friend Cara. I don't know. Oh, there in the back. Cara, Forestry, Fire and State Lands, the fire department, Trail Mix and others to develop kind of a work plan for restoration to to sort of recover from the flood and to implement more programmatic maintenance of the parkway as an asset. It's part of this drainage master planning. It's a big component of it, but it's also something we know we need to do regardless so we can get started. But that wasn't covered in this presentation because it's sort of immediately happening and will evolve as we go through this planning effort.
Okay, I think it helps us and probably the public to understand there are parallel things happening.
Yeah.
I think we just don't
Yeah.
want to get
Forget
in a
one.
tunnel, for a year where we come out the other end and goodness knows what happens. In the
I see
meantime.
it's
Yeah.
like there's cleanup effort, right? There's restoration effort, and then there's like infrastructure improvements. And infrastructure is used very loosely, I think, natural and built.
Anything else, Ronnie? No? Tawny, do you have anything?
How could I have anything more? No, thank you, you guys, for putting this together. I know a lot of work went into it and a lot of hours. Levi, I am curious where all that 4,000 tons of debris has gone. And is it stored somewhere? Are we able to utilize that in any of our future efforts?
We have been stockpiling some. We've given quite a bit of it away. There's a few businesses and homeowners that have requested I could use that fill, and we've delivered it to them so they can utilize it. Some that rebuild their properties or for construction purposes or whatever. We are stockpiling it on city properties so we can utilize it.
Can use it later.
Yeah, we can use it later on.
Okay. And is the city delivering that material to residents is not something we do on a regular or normal basis. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. I guess what we'd like to have you guys do next is come up with a proposal, I guess, for the corridor drainage plan idea. Costs, what your plans are. I'm sure you're gonna put that up for bid. And then also, I think it'd be good to identify some areas that we can work on now. I'm very curious about the warning system. You've talked about that a lot. I'm not sure how much that costs, but it would be good if you guys can identify some of the issues that we can look at now, what those costs are, and then present it to the council and we can kind of go from there.
You know, we could do it kind of a short term, midterm, long term.
I think that'd be
Approach.
great. The other thing for you guys to consider is state appropriations. I know I've brought that up a lot and I know that our state representatives have offered that as an option if we can't find any funding elsewhere. And everything seems to be in limbo. I know with FEMA, a lot of the focus probably is down in Florida. But I think it would be a good idea for us to look into those appropriations and what they'd be willing to help fund if we could convince them to give us some money from the state level. I think there's an opportunity there that we should take advantage of. So let's think about that. Okay, anything else? Thank you. Thanks, Levi and your crew, and Annie and your crew for all the work you're doing, and looking forward to hopefully working with Carr on some restoration issues that we
Thank you,
need to deal with.
Thank you.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
all right. All right, we got started early. Some folks may have showed up, after that time. So if anybody's here wants to be citizens be heard, if you haven't filled out a form, please fill out a form. And Sarah, if you'd like to, you can go ahead and fill that out and provide it later if you'd like, and go ahead and.
Oh, so that right there, I receive here. Where they go?
Okay, so shall I speak in that?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and speak and then fill it out?
Okay. So first, thank you all for your service to the community. And I want to just appreciate Jason and Luke for your letter to the editor and kind of calling our community to come together for the election. And thank you, Kaylin. I wrote a letter to all of you a couple weeks ago regarding the street modification, parking and street planting. And Kaylin, thank you for, sounds like you've reached out to the architects in terms of diversifying the plantings and drawing on local knowledge. So thank you for that. I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about some of the cost savings of street tree planting, because obviously the first thing that hits us is the cost of doing that, especially when there's already a plan in place. And the benefits, as I see them, come into 4 categories. I'll speak just to a portion of the benefits. The first is that it can actually save the city quite a lot of money in terms of street durability. And I looked at a study from Modesto, California, where the street superintendent estimated, and their climate is somewhat similar, summer temperatures between 85 and 105. And he estimated that with a moderately shaded street, you might postpone repaving 10 years. And with a heavily shaded street, you could postpone paving up to 25 years. So just kind of thinking of that as we're looking at this possibility of street trees. The second major area of benefit, and actually one more thing on that, is in the study that they did, this fairly long-term study, they had savings of $10.84 per cubic meter just by having large hackberries. So, and that's over a 30-year period. The second major benefit is increased livability. Street tree shading can result in approximately a 10-degree cooling of the community. And obviously that trickles out to other benefits. And one other side benefit is reduced noise. So just as one more added little piece, and as a result of not only being more livable, it also can drastically reduce the costs of cooling between 25 and 50%. And sometimes if you layer some of the different strategies, even more than 50%.
So that both economically reduces the amount of money leaving our community, so more dollars circulating locally. But it also has a wonderful impact on long-term reducing pollution, reducing our carbon footprint, and that we can be contributing to the kind of global solution and hopefully even modeling for other communities what's possible. And then the last piece that I wanted to say is I feel like tree planting is something that no matter what your political persuasion or different perspective, it's something that most people love to sit under a shady tree, or it's something that has the possibility of bringing people together. And I would be happy to look at writing some grants and actually helping do some of the community organizing around bringing people together, both for planting as well as for helping with some of the maintenance. And so that's just my little 2 cents as to really maximizing the tree shading as we're looking at these modifications. And I know we're just talking about a few streets, and it's just more cost effective, I would imagine, even though the plan is always tidy and in place. If we can look at those possibilities, whether it's in the middle of some of our really wide streets of planting, or whether it's and on streets like the one over here where there's been the pilot project of the parking in the middle, a lot of those parking spaces are can really accommodate those gargantuan vans that have become all over the place. And by putting trees in the middle of some of those, it would provide parking that would probably be, you know, for more normal sized cars without sacrificing whole parking spots. So there's somebody who knows a lot more than I in terms of the engineering. So mine's just kind of the overview of benefits. So thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you, Sarah. Great ideas. And I noticed Chuck was sticking around, so hopefully he'll take those ideas and let the folks that are working on that project know. Yeah,
Happy to point you to some of the research that I was drawing from, if that's helpful.
that'd be great, Sarah. Thanks so much.
And I'll put it down.
Yep, stick it in the box. Thanks. Anybody else, citizens to be heard? Okay, next up is Ben with our strategic planning check-in, and this is just to review. As you all remember, last year we did a strategic plan in March, and that was really implemented in July. And so Ben is here to let us know what we've done and what we still need to do.
That is correct. Strategic plans typically run, we kind of view them on a fiscal year basis, July through June. As we know, work doesn't really fit within that. It's not all work doesn't stop at the end of June and then pick up in July. So what we have is kind of a starting point from the strategic plan. That's probably a lot of it's probably going to roll over into next fiscal year, and we'll be talking about that. The goal of this evening is basically just to provide an update on those objectives and key initiatives that were started as part of that strategic planning process, and to introduce a tool that we've developed to provide ongoing updates to that. So it's not quite live data, but it's pretty darn close. So what I shared here is the strategic plan that was developed as part of the strategic planning process by Logan Simpson, who is our contracted facilitator. And this is the first page of that strategic plan that identified 5 goals. Goals being the larger, maybe a little bit more difficult to measure focuses, kind of long-term objectives of the city. Sorry, try not to use terms interchangeably here. Not objectives, these are goals. Housing being one, city capabilities, sustainability, infrastructure, and community investment. And throughout this document, there's various initiatives, indicators for success that are identified. We have the objectives are ranked. So then we get into objectives, which are more defined, clearly defined, kind of what we think of when you call a goal a SMART goal. It's time-based, realistic, achievable, I did that totally out of order. But objectives are the things that we can easily measure and say, yes, we've definitively accomplished this within the time frame that we provided for that. So what I did is my goal for the last couple of weeks was to translate this document into something that was a little bit more manageable, easy to measure, and basically to say for each of those objectives, are we on track? Are we behind? Or is it something that's still upcoming? And so with that, I wanted to just navigate to that here live so that you can see how to get there yourself if it's something you want to reference in the future. So on the city website, under your government, we have a new link, city strategic plan, pretty straightforward. And this embeds this report that will now take a second to load. And here we have basically that this report is fully embedded here. Obviously, the text is pretty small on the website. It's kind of difficult to see, but here you also have the full link to go straight to this tool that we've developed in some third-party software that the city already subscribes to. I will make note of that. I did look at a few software providers for this, but found that using an existing tool didn't cost us anything. So at least for the next couple of years, I think this makes sense to use. So as I mentioned, we have 5 goals for the city, and through the strategic planning process, we identified 51 objectives, key initiatives, key results, basically, and projects, capital infrastructure projects primarily. And what we did here was we broke down those objectives within the 5 goal areas and identified their status. So here you can see I'm hovering over the top left category under housing, and we have 5 total objectives or key initiatives under the housing goal. And we can see there are 2 that are under the status is minor disruption. Minor disruption typically means it's just behind schedule. Major disruption would indicate it's likely that the project or objective is compromised. Here's the legend for the various statuses. From upcoming, which just basically means that we're not even on track yet because it hasn't even been initiated, nor is it scheduled to be initiated. We have completed, status pending really isn't used yet, and then minor and major disruption, and green is on track. So what I would like to do for this update is kind of walk you through a few of the objectives. I'm not going to walk through each of the 51. Feel free to do that on your own time. But what you do is by clicking what I did there was I clicked the link. Sorry, it wasn't a link. Just by clicking the actual bar chart, it connects you to the data source. It's a read-only version so that the public can't go in and mess with everything, but they can at least view the objectives that we've set forth under that goal. So here we have, I highlighted in gray just for reference purposes, the ones that I wanted to talk about this evening in each category. So I did want to provide an update on the Walnut Lane project. So that is one of those that's currently in minor disruption. And the reason for that is simply because the time frame for some of those early tasks took a little bit longer than anticipated. So by clicking the plus sign, you can then see what the subtasks or the tasks for that objective are. And if there are dates associated with those that would help you to understand where we're at in that process, you can see that there. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I don't appear to be able to do that. Hopefully it's not too small. It's quite small. Here, so the first objective is the resident survey. And the second objective is publish the RFSQ. That's the request for statement of qualifications. And we anticipate doing that in the near future. I think that's going to be on Carly's updates. But there you can see that we have a target completion date. Now, this isn't for the whole project. This is for this phase of the project of June of 23. I'll go ahead and collapse that. And another one that we've experienced a minor disruption on is the review of subdivision ordinances, the PAD and PUD consider an overlay approach. And the reason for the minor disruption on this category is just because it's a prioritization issue, and it's part of the next item, which is this August 2021 matrix, which Ronnie inquired about what that was referring to. And this was a matrix of priorities that Nora presented to the city council as various options that could be considered in August of 2021. And that document has since translated into a list that Corey has generated of different policy priorities that the council can consider. So while the subdivision ordinance may be under minor disruption, the current land use prioritization list is on track for completion. We'll dive into city capabilities. So city capabilities are basically exactly as it sounds. Are we able to provide the level of service that we're committing to? So there's different types of objectives within that. The first being city staffing levels. And this is one that's difficult to actually say completed, because city staff, there's always going to be turnover and there's always going to be vacancies. But I can fairly confidently say that we're in a very good place with city staffing, from the police department to other various positions that were vacant. When we went through the strategic planning process, we had a significant number of vacancies, which have since been filled. Public safety, our ERP, this relates to the FATPOT, the software. This is something that I know the police department has been working on, and they've been meeting with various vendors. I'm not going to do the drop down for each of them, but here you can see the first task within that is to meet with prospective vendors, follow proper procurement protocol. Basically, you can kind of see the subtasks that lead up to each objective if you want to really drill down and find out where we're at with these objectives. Regulation of noise impacts. So I did highlight any that were under major or minor disruption so that I could make mention of them, because I feel like those are kind of important. Regulation of noise impacts essentially has two tasks tied to it, and that's targeted speed enforcement. That's something that we talked about, as well as working with UTV rental companies. That is under what we're calling major disruption due to the litigation situation. So that is why that one is under major disruption. Here we have the next item that I wanted to mention was municipal code review and revision, which is under minor disruption. And that is related to planning department vacancy. So this is a task that's going to require a fully staffed planning department in order to move forward. And so kind of the first priority is to backfill that vacancy. And the last one under city capabilities is one that I'm actually really excited about, is developing 2 to 3 key performance indicators by department or division and making that transparent. So basically how we go about measuring performance of our city departments and making that information available to the public, just so that we can hold ourselves accountable for our own performance. After that one is sustainability. This one I had to work very closely with Alexi on, as she's integrated into the position, and I applaud her efforts in hitting the ground running. There were a lot of things here that have been they haven't been moving forward due to having that position not filled, but now that she's here, she's excited about moving those things forward. Developing a water utility resource management plan. You all are very familiar with that process. That objective is on track. Here we have a green streets policy, and this one is considered under major disruption. because we determined that the priority would be to develop King Creek Boulevard, design that, and then develop the policy kind of in conjunction with that. So that's why a Green Streets policy is under major disruption. Dark sky compliance, community and city. That one's on track. I did want to mention Alexi's very knowledgeable in that category, and she's excited to move that one forward. So then we move to, let's talk about community investment, which was probably, I think this is the one with the fewest categories. There are only 4 under community investment. Here we have, for example, revenue enhancement. And this one has various tasks under it, and it's been moving forward. Chuck mentioned the impact fee analysis. We are doing an impact fee analysis for transportation, parks, public safety, and stormwater, all of which are very important. Stormwater rate study, that's something that Chuck also mentioned during his presentation. And priority tax consideration, that's something that we will be talking about in strategic planning, if that's something that the council would like to again consider for the fiscal year 2024. And the final one in community investment relates to the comprehensive financial sustainability plan. This is basically our long-term financial modeling and how our current revenue sources are able to pay for our long-term financial needs. That's one that is also currently on track. And without a doubt, the biggest goal is the infrastructure goal, primarily because we have a lot of projects in progress. Every time I talk to Chuck, I'm amazed at the number of balls that he has in the air and that he is able to very quickly respond to any questions and deadlines on. I worked through these with him today to identify those projects that are under minor or major disruption. So those are primarily what I highlighted here. So the first one being city facilities upgrades, HVAC for gym, trees, xeriscaping. That one's under major disruption due to the fact that we opted to prioritize facilities planning before we moved forward with any of those improvements. We have I will say, I don't think I actually need to hit on all of these projects. A lot of the disruptions on our infrastructure projects are related to exactly what Chuck was presenting on, Chuck Levi and Didar were presenting on, simply the capacity that's been consumed by the flooding and kind of looking at various options for that, basically, reprioritizing what we've had there. Another reason for some of these disruptions has simply been the fact that contractors have been either difficult to find or slow to respond to bids. I think Chuck mentioned that the last 3 bids have gone out multiple times. It was a shocking revelation to hear how the bid process has been for some of these major projects. I know that the NRCS stream bank stabilization project, they're kind of reanalyzing based on the latest damages that have happened. And with that said, I think that wraps up my presentation of the strategic plan and kind of how we're looking at providing transparency to those objectives on an ongoing basis. I said that this information isn't necessarily live. What I anticipate doing is meeting with, joining Carly's weekly meetings once a month. I'll be joining those department head meetings and updating this. So I anticipate within the first couple of weeks of every month, we'll make changes. So it's almost live, but not quite. Happy to answer any questions that any council members may have about our strategic planning update.
Just a quick thing when I log on to it, it tells me I need to log in to access the published item.
Yeah, I can only open the housing one and then all the other ones require login.
Okay, that's a pretty quick setting. So I will get on that. It's a fresh thing, and I'm sure there's some bugs to work out. The last thing that I wanted to make note of is that we're looking at our fiscal year 2024 strategic planning session. So as we set budgetary priorities for the next budget year, and we're planning to do that a little earlier this year, We're looking tentatively at January 19th and 20th, which is a Thursday, Friday in January. And we'll probably send out an email to that effect. But we did that in March of this year. So we're jumping on them a little bit earlier so that we can make sure that those strategic priorities get enough attention in the budget process.
Questions?
Not really any questions, but thank you so much for putting this together. I know when we were up at the ULCT conference, we were talking about almost something exactly like this. Because yeah, there's a lot that we're kind of trying to juggle, and sometimes it's hard to remember what our goals and objectives were when we decided them like 8 months ago. So something like this is really fantastic, and I think it goes a long way in terms of transparency for the community. So really appreciate the effort to kind of put this all together.
Anybody else? Questions for Ben? No, I agree with you, Luke. This is exactly what we learned about. So great job, Ben. This is just what we needed, I think.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank
Good.
you.
Mhm.
Was that only 8 months ago? Like, it seems like 4 years ago.
Right. Yeah. So next one's coming up soon in January. So mark your calendars and then staff will let us know, confirm that. I think we're gonna go off-site. That's the plan. And have both the staff and the council together at the same time, which I think is a really good idea.
And you'll be interviewed beforehand, just like we've done in previous years. We're doing it in-house though, Ben and I, so it'll be conversations before we get to the strategic planning session itself. So we'll be doing some foundational work before January 19th.
Great. All right, we have no department head updates this evening. Summer, how are we doing with getting Nathan and our attorneys on?
I'm on.
Okay, very good. All right, just wanted to make sure. Is everybody okay? Does anybody need a break? We'll just keep plugging ahead. All right, first business item is a consent agenda. We've got 4 items on this agenda. The recommendation of Jason Taylor to the USU Advisory Board for the USU President's consideration. We have the Q1 fiscal year 23 preliminary financials, approval of the minutes from October 25th. The agenda says 27th. That was a typo. So we're approving the minutes from October 25th. And then approval of the bills against the city of the Moab in the amount of $780,284.29. Any questions on the consent agenda? Then I'll ask for a motion.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
All right, motion by Tawny, second.
I'll second.
Seconded by Jason. Any discussion, Tawny?
Nope.
Jason?
No.
All right, anybody else?
Oh, I just, since you guys sometimes like to know, I had a few minor minutes edits. Summer already took care of them. Thank you, Summer.
All right, thanks, Ronnie. All right, call for the question. All in favor of the consent agenda, item 6.1 through 6.4?
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next is Annie to talk to us about the Parks Master Plan contract recommendation. I just would like to let everybody know, in case you didn't, that Kalen served on that selection committee, so he was a part of the process. So take it away, Annie.
Sure. So this was an exciting project or process for us. We had 9 proposals. One came in a little bit late, so we can only review 8 of them, which is a really great response. And we had a lot of impressive proposals. So it was a challenging process. It was so challenging that it took our review committee 2 meetings. In the first meeting, we narrowed the group down to a few that we really wanted to get deep dive into. And then in the second meeting, we took those few and really looked at them and pretty much scoured them over because they were all very impressive. The things that we were looking for or highlighting was their community engagement plan. That was very important to us. And also relevant experience. I think Moab has unique characteristics. We wanted to potentially have experience with the town similar to that. And so we have chosen Conservation Technics, which is a firm out of Portland, Oregon, and some of the things that we liked about their community engagement process. One thing that they offer that the other firms had optional was, in addition to an online survey, They are going to do a random mailing sample to about 2,000 households in the community. So then we would have a subset that is a little bit more statistically valid versus who chooses to participate. We can compare those as well. They have several in-person meetings. So they'll be here a minimum of 4 times throughout the process. They have some subgroups that have been starting the process of interviewing the community before they start to get an idea of what they want, along with a lot of other things that the government else has. They also offered providing storyboards and materials for what they call pop-up engagement, so that they will have these, so we can go to, if it's a softball event or the arts and ag market, we can show up as staff and have prepared materials to meet people where they're at, in addition to that. Another thing that we really liked about them is they are a smaller firm, so we think they might have more time to focus on this project and be a little more nimble than the larger firms that had submitted. They have done the master plan process for St. George and Bluffdale, and they had great recommendations. And they also worked in Hood River, Oregon, which was not completely comparable, but it's a very small town that has a high tourism element to it as well. And another thing that I appreciated, and both the references acknowledged, is that their key principals, there's 2 of them, they have been practitioners. So they worked in the field before they became consultants, and have a plan that's very implementable and not just grand ideas.
Great.
So we're excited to move forward, and we anticipate this project will take about a year.
Kaylin, do you have anything to add since you were part of the selection process?
It was more intensive than I realized it was going to be when I signed up, because of the number and quality of the proposals and teams. But I really appreciated working with the staff and their perspectives on what was needed, as well as their firsthand knowledge of some of the consultants. Thanks for calling references. I think that was
It's very helpful.
yeah, sounds like it.
Mhm.
So
Good. Thanks. Questions for Annie? Ronnie?
So I was going to thank you, Annie, for all the information you sent to me. That's very helpful. And thanks for sending us their proposal, which was also really interesting. I guess I just had 2 or 3 comments to think through as one goes through. One was, I realized I appreciate, the random sampling of 2,000 households. I would kind of be curious on the cost of a full bulk mailing to all of our households, in part because our communities tends to be very passionate about public spaces and parks and recreation and trails, and because there has been a lot of interest, especially after the visioning process, for possibility for involvement, more involvement. And I also think, just on the transparency and outreach is something in our vision process that community members asked us to try to do even more for. So in some ways, I just feel like the beauty of sending it to every household is you don't have someone worrying that, why was I randomly left out? Anyway, I would just be interested in the cost of that. And then I did appreciate that they came in under the maximum of the funds that we had. But it was an option not included to do the survey in Spanish, which I would certainly support. I didn't know if it's ever an option for a municipality to pay a local translator. It might come in less if that helps with cost. And just another observation that might help is we currently, with the Site Futures Committee and getting the word out about our surveys on the future of the tailings pile, are partnering with Grand County, and they just have the Grand County Connects aspect of their website. So when it comes to getting the word out, I have a feeling they might be willing to help just kind of boost the fact that we're doing this, again, because of crossover between city and county residents and just the passion we all have for recreation and parks and trails. That was it.
Okay. For those questions or comments?
I guess they were comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ronnie. Any other questions for Annie? Then I will call for the motion to approve the master plan contract with
Conservation Technics.
Conservation Technics.
I move to approve a Parks Master Plan contract with Conservation Techniques in the amount of $97,890.
Thanks, Kaylin. Second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Tawny. Any discussion, Kaylin?
Nope.
Connie? Anybody else? I'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Great. Looking forward to getting this process going.
Me too.
Thanks, Annie. All right, next up is a proposed resolution 2022, a resolution amending the City of Moab Personnel Manual. Danny's not able to be here tonight, so Ben is going to present this to us. And basically, this is like an annual review of the personnel manual. A lot of it is just cleanup. There was some questions about paid time off. So
Yeah.
Ben, go for it.
Don't have much of a presentation. So we do have, I think that it's important to note, as the mayor mentioned, this is an annual update. Basically, we kind of make comments, keep our notes throughout the year of things that need to be updated in the policy manual. And, you know, unless there's a major change that needs to happen, we just do it once a year. I think there is one note that is worth mentioning, definitely worth mentioning because of the fiscal impact, and that relates to the PTO payout. So the current policy is that after 100, that only 100 hours of an employee's accrued vacation time is payable on favorable termination. And what we've found is that it actually has ended up costing us more than simply paying out the full maximum accrual if an employee has maxed that out. You can accrue 240 hours, but doesn't hold any cash value. And the reason for that is because we've found that employees simply take vacation time before their departure. And during that time, we're paying them, we continue to pay them benefits, URS benefits, health benefits, and other, associated costs with employment. And then once they've drawn down to that 100-hour mark, and it's actually pretty consistent. There have been quite a number of employees that have kind of, manipulated the system until that time. So by increasing that payout to 240 hours, we hope that we're actually minimizing our cost out. That said, we'll have a financial impact on our financial statements because currently, as a liability, Danny probably wouldn't have touched on this, but here I go. In our annual financial statements, we only have to recognize $100 of wages as a liability because that's the only thing that holds cash value. So now there will be, our liabilities will be inflated relative to prior years because of that, marginally. So for those employees that have accrued that much higher of an amount.
So Ben?
Yeah.
How much can employees, how much vacation time or paid time off, however we refer to it, how much can they carry over year to year?
240 hours. So
Okay, so
currently you
that's-
can carry over 240
So
hours.
currently you can't carry over more than that. Okay,
That's right.
so it would have to be, it's kind of use it or lose it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions regarding that or any other policies.
Yeah, so thanks. Danny answered a lot of questions I had. It's more just educational for me, so I learned a lot. Thank you. And I realized there was one thing I didn't ask you about that might matter in our motion, or maybe it doesn't. And that is in the edits to 700, we have edits to 700.3, which is compensation for holidays, which references 700.3, the 13 floating holidays. Back last year in December, we approved, of course, because under Biden, we have added another federal holiday and it's not listed here. And so I didn't know if that actually should reference 14 floating holidays with Juneteenth.
Sounds like the crowd is saying that yes, it should reference 14. with that addition.
Okay, I mean, that's the only, when reading through all of this and I'm getting all these answers to questions, that was the only thing I was thinking.
Right, because none of the holidays were,
Mhm.
we didn't reduce any to make up for that. So
Okay, I mean, I'm willing to make a motion that includes that. It would include adding that holiday to 700.2 under the list of holidays, but then also in 700.3 referencing in that paragraph, I think there are 2 references to 13 floating holidays, so changing those to 14.
Do you want to make a motion?
Sure, let me find my official statement I am supposed to make.
Just so
Uh,
you know, too, on the agenda
uh-huh.
summary, it is resolution 30, 2022.
Ah,
There are 2 numbers.
it's
on that.
not 28.
It's not 28.
It's
It's what's
labeled
on
as
the
30.
agenda.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. I will try to do that. Okay, let's see. I move to approve resolution 30-2022, approving the amendments to the personnel manual and making additional amendments in 700.2 under policy, adding Juneteenth, which is June 19th, observed on the Monday or Friday, closest, of course, if that falls on a weekend, but and then under 700.3 compensation for holidays, where the first sentence would be edited to read, all full-time regular employees receive 14 floating holidays per year, period. Sorry, there are 2 sentences impacted. And the second sentence would be, these 14 floating holidays may be used for religious or cultural holidays or other state or federal holidays. I think,
All right, Ronnie, thanks.
yeah, I didn't do a search and replace, but I think that's the only place that number is mentioned.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve resolution 30, 2022 with the addition of Juneteenth as the 14th holiday. Second?
A second.
Second by Tawny. Any further discussion, Ronnie?
No.
Tawny?
I just have a quick question, Ben.
Mhm.
In the anti-fraud section, that was all brand new. It was all added this year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Who created that, or was most of it
Mhm.
mandated by statute, or
certainly not mandated.
is there a,
The origin is the state auditor's office. You may remember in June every year I present the fraud risk assessment.
Mhm.
And that's one of those 5-point categories that we have been missing. So basically by adding this as a policy, I think we've now we've added every policy that the state auditor's office recommends.
okay, so.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought
Because
that it was.
policies prevent fraud.
Yeah, no, I just wondered if we had a fraud wizard that created all that out of nowhere, or if it came from someplace.
Yeah,
Fraud
it's
with-
their language.
There's all kinds of wizards.
Thanks, Tawny. Motion made by Ronnie, seconded by Tawny. Any other discussion from council? All those in favor?
Right.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thanks, Ben. Okay, moving right along. Item number 7.3, a proposed resolution number 2022-16. An ordinance approving the vacation of the abandoned right-of-way known as Rimrock Road on the property located at 1492 South Aggie Boulevard and Highway 191, Moab, Utah 84532. And essentially, just for clarification purposes, this is really a relocation of the road. Sitla had given the new right-of-way to the city when we built Aggie Boulevard. And so the right-of-way that's there now is no longer necessary. So that's what this is about. Corey, do you want to go ahead and talk any more about this?
Sure, we have a short presentation if you'd like. I know there were a couple questions about the history to this section of property that we are vacating as right of way as the described Rimrock Road. In short, the history is when we annexed in that property as a part of the USU Sitla master plan, there was a county designation of right of way at the time, but that right of way was purely representational as it went through kind of a infeasible area for a road. It was just meant to be a placeholder. With the development of Aggie Boulevard, the reallocation of that right-of-way location or easement had been moved, and without generating a swap, they just created a new easement and then did not vacate the older easement. So this is really just record keeping on our end to make sure that we are accurately moving those sections of right-of-way to where they're supposed to be.
I think Anna will be able to share something. We can skip through the presentation. Unless you wanted to identify on the survey to see it more directly. And then more specifically to the monetary question, why there wasn't the consideration for why there is an exchange here is that it was, again, a movement of right of way. So we're not losing any land. It just wasn't exchanged at the appropriate time.
You know, I think what was really helpful for me was the map.
Mhm.
I think that really kind of shows how kind of irrelevant this right of way actually is.
There's a little preview of our next presentation there. Anna's just pulling up the.
Meanwhile, does anybody have any questions about this right of way? Ronnie?
Oh, just because these questions on the shared document didn't get answers. So just a quick question. In the resolution, item G ends right-of-way vacation approval criteria, comma, have been met as follows, colon, and then there's nothing. So is that a typo or was there supposed to be language in there?
No, you're exactly right. It was indeed a typo. It was actually a previous draft that was included on your packet, and our city council draft was in a different file. So we had to move that up and advance that. So that should be a preceding whereas that will follow with that. I believe it was replacing F and G were swapped.
Okay,
So it was just a mix up in the location of whereas. I think from a staff perspective, we'd request that the city council make an amendment to the resolution document to reflect that. So we have that document already produced. It just didn't get shared in the packet. And didn't-
oh, I mean, do you have it online? Can you pull it up or you're just saying that that's effectively all it is? F and G just have to be swapped?
Correct.
Okay.
We can.
We can
Okay.
pull it up. Did you want us to?
No, I guess not.
Can we use the map on number 2, slide number 2? I think
Sure.
that's, yeah,
Yeah.
that's easier to see.
Okay, so thanks for answering about the monetary value. Any confusion, sometimes, we go to the city maps page and we pull up a map and obviously not everything's always going to be up to date, but the fact that so below the rocks is officially now changed to Aggie Boulevard, right?
Correct.
Okay. It's just in case it helps you, it still shows up that way on our map. And then Rimrock Road was just a previous name for it.
Yes, and as you can see on the overhead, that it was in a pretty much different space spot, and they rearranged a lot of things to accommodate their development. So
Okay, cool. Thanks. Those are my questions.
Any other questions? All right, I'll ask for a motion to approve ordinance number 2022-16, approving the vacation of abandoned right-of-way known as Rimrock Road. Motion,
I'll move to approve proposed ordinance number 2022-16, an ordinance approving the vacation of the abandoned right-of-way known as Rimrock Road on property located at 1492 South Aggie Boulevard and Highway 191 Moab, Utah, 84532.
second. Seconded by Luke. Any discussion, Connie?
Does that motion have to include, did you guys want that in the motion, the switching of those two items on the resolution?
We'd appreciate that. We can, on the back end, I believe that'd be a scrivener's error. We can do without an official motion if you like, but it would be cleaner, right?
Do you want me to amend that motion?
Please. Yeah.
Okay. I gotta get the bifocals in the right place. Move to approve proposed ordinance 2022-16, an ordinance approving the vacation of the abandoned right-of-way known as Rimrock Road on property located at 1492 South Aggie Boulevard and Highway 191 Moab, Utah, 84532, with the amendment that those two item numbers are just cleaned up and switched around. Reorder F and G, yeah.
All right, Luke, do you accept that amendment?
I do.
All right. Amended motion made by Tawny, seconded by Luke. Any further discussion? I'll call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Okay, thanks. You guys are still up, so don't go anywhere. I just want to let you all know that Ellen Weinstein is here. She is the owner of Shamrock Development and the developer on this pre-annexation request. And just so you all know, I know that there's been some questions. This is not approving an annexation. This is just the pre-annexation agreement that allows us to ask the developer to provide certain requests that we have in order to consider an annexation down the road. And we've talked about this extensively over the last several months. Shamrock has agreed to the 50% active employee housing and also included in that student and faculty. I think that's the intent, is student housing. So we wanted to make sure that that's a part of this agreement, and a 50-year restrictive covenant, which is kind of like a deed restriction. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that. It kind of gives us the same restrictions as a deed restriction for that 50-year time frame. So ready to go?
Thank you so much. As we're going to have really a rolling presentation, and that I anticipate we'll have participation from Nathan in this, and also Carly at the request of the mayor, and I think some of the council, to go over the larger perspective of what the annexation process is, and then specifically what we're looking at tonight with this pre-annexation. So on this next slide is really your overall map. I know there's a little gallery window maybe in the way there a little bit, but this is when we're looking at this maybe through the analogy of a microscope. You're going to have a further pulled away view, a tighter view, and an even more tighter detailed view. This is a really quite robust process. So these little words and these little bubbles aren't meant to encapsulate everything we're going to have to do, but it gives you a general roadmap. Where we're at now, obviously with the pre-annexation agreement, is preceding any official annexation processing. We have received the petition materials to move forward, but have put them on hold until we can analyze this pre-annexation agreement, which really takes the form similar to that of a development agreement, where with the pre-annexation, as the mayor has described, what the applicant is proposing is a coordinated agreement with the council that there is some surety that if the council were to annex, so we are not obligated to annex them, but if we were to, there are conditions that they would be coming into the city under. There is mutual exchange in this benefit. So the applicants are aware and going to propose the developments in which we're also wanting for the city, and it gives them the utility to plan for what they're needing. So it's a mutually beneficial agreement in this way. Once we move beyond that, it really does become a state standard. Nathan provided a memo with updates to that state standard. So we'll have, like I was describing with this microscope, we'll get a little tighter and a little tighter and a little tighter. Go back one more for me. That's right. So again, very broad view. Moving in advance of the petition, the city council will accept to move forward with that process, that we say, yep, we analyze this and it meets the criteria, we want to move forward. It then is turned over to the recorder's office to begin doing all the magic of noticing, certifying, and filing that is required through the state provisions. And then through that, we begin kind of the review process. So with those noticing materials, there are opportunities for the public to file objections or protests, depending on the language there. Depending on if there are no protests or objections, or there'll be a different path set. And that's really where this time, lack of security and time comes in, is that it gets out of the city's hands at one point. So if we were to move forward, there are no petitions, objections, we go to planning commission, there's review and recommendation at that point, and then off to noticing for a public hearing with the city council, and then city council approval, and then we take it off to go record that. In essence, if there are objections, it leaves our city body and goes to, which I believe is hosted under the county, which is the boundary commission, or a generation of a boundary commission, to house any of those objections in that body. And then it comes back to city council for final review after that. Next slide, we're going to zoom in a little bit with our microscope. So there's a lot here. This is a previous material flow chart. It is very detailed. It's really helpful, but for quick view, this would be, we'd be having your eyes glaze over if we went through this verbatim. Going even further now to the next slide.
And but that is that the existing one? I don't think we've updated it.
That's, yeah, 2007.
Yeah.
The benchmarks are going to be the same, but like Nathan had proposed, there are amendments at the state level that have changed both noticing requirements and some of the procedural requirements. But generally, those benchmarks or we're zooming back out, those bubbles are correct. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anna to give the new flow chart with Nathan's updates.
Okay, yeah, so this is the updated annexation flow chart that is based on the most current state regulations for annexation. If you look at it, the first thing we do is the recorders issue a notice of intent to file an annexation petition. What that entails is the petitioner goes to the recorder's office and then lets them know basically that they want to file a petition. The petitioner sends a copy of the notice of intent to each affected entity. This includes Grand County and any municipality within a half mile. Grand County then sends notices within 20 days after receiving the notice to all property owners within the area and within 300 feet of the area proposed to be annexed. Grand County then sends a certificate indicating the notice has been mailed. And then once that happens, once the applicant receives the certificate of mailing from the county, they do bring that into our municipality or the local municipality that you want to annex into. And then there's a list of things that they need to submit with that. I won't go over that with you unless you want to hear that. The next step would be acceptance or denial of the petition. The municipality legislative body may deny the petition within 5 days after the denial. Mail a written notice of the denial to both the contact sponsor and the Grand County clerk, and then accept the petition for further consideration within 30 days.
If we
And
might,
then,
Anna, we could probably, because I think Nathan might touch on those.
yeah, okay.
Walk
Just go
through,
through.
yeah, walk through this.
Okay.
And then we'll go.
And then if denied, the petitioner can make changes and resubmit again, file the petition again. And then if it's accepted, then they hold the public hearing. And then if there's no protest within 30 days of the public hearing, issue a decision. Within 60 days of the public hearing, file information with Lieutenant Governor's office. And then after Lieutenant Governor's approval, file information with Grand County Recorder's office. If there are protests, they will need to create a boundary commission. Boundary commission conducts feasibility studies and then holds a hearing. Within 30 days, issue a decision either approving or disapproving annexation. They can also make modifications to the proposed annexation as well on this. And then the next step, if it gets approved either way, is the annexation is adopted and approved. And this is just basically the timeline based on our ordinance. Do you have any questions about this? This is also, and so, there's submit a petition for city council consideration within 14 days. Once the petition is accepted by city council, it is sent to the recorder's office. We went over that. Within 10 days of the application being deemed complete, a notice of certification by the city council will be published in the newspaper for 3 weeks. Planning commission meeting for recommendation to city council is held for the petition once the notice of certification is published. Notice of certification by the city council is sent to all affected entities such as Grand County and the health department and to property owners within 300 feet of the property that is being annexed. And then that's within 20 days of the application being certified. The affected entities have 30 days once they receive the notice to protest the petition. And then if the council decides to approve the annexation and no protests are filed, notice is sent to affected entities and property owners within 300 feet within 7 days. If protests are filed, the petition is sent to the Boundary Commission for a written recommendation. And that's 30 days. And then once the written recommendation from the Boundary Commission is submitted with the city council, a final decision is made.
But
Anna,
thanks, Nathan. Go ahead.
can I just clarify one thing? This is based on a memo that we put together. There is the language. There is a requirement for a feasibility consultant if a protest is filed. I just want to be clear that requirement only applies to municipalities in a county of the first class. But I think that going through that feasibility analysis is very important, and it's something that we recommend. That's why I included it in the memo, because there are 15 statutory criteria that, while not required for a city like Moab that's not in a county of first class, is still a really good exercise to go through. I mean, these are some pretty basic questions about services, whether it leaves an island or peninsula, the type of projected growth. And so those are things that should be considered. So while not required for you because you're in a county of not the first class, I still think it's worth doing. Whether or not you hire a consultant to do that is up to you. But the long and short of it is that the pros and cons of the annexation will be considered through this very detailed annexation process. What we're talking about right now is just kind of laying out the terms by which the council would consider an annexation. And as we've discussed before, the annexation process is really one of the best tools that the city has to secure workforce and other types of housing commitments. And that's in large part due to the fact that city's not required to accept annexation. You have a lot of leverage. And so from the developer standpoint, doing a pre-annexation agreement at the front end is helpful because they don't want to waste a lot of time doing something if we're not in the ballpark of approving it. And then on the other hand, if we don't have an agreement and a project goes through the annexation process, once they're in the city, then they're entitled to do whatever they want with their land in accordance with their zoning. And so that wouldn't necessarily require them to do any sort of workforce housing. And so that's really the point of the pre-annexation agreement. It's not part of the statutory process, but it is a tool a lot of cities use to provide a little bit more certainty for them in terms of what they want out of the annexation, and also provides more certainty to the developer so they have an idea of whether or not the city is even willing to consider the annexation.
We're moving into some details of the project. I know that was a lot of material. It is a complicated process. We often get the question of how long can we expect this to take? And really, unfortunately, it is a decision tree or flow chart like rhythm. Our best evaluation, because we've given each of the possible paths that can potentially happen, about 4 months is a pretty reasonable but optimistic timeline. So just for the public that's aware, it can be without any encumbrances or any objections. It could really be as short as maybe about 100 days. But that's also without any noticing snafus where we needed an extra week because of an odd month or something like that. So 4 months really is about as tight as we can make it. And we're obviously going to be pursuing all of our application processes as sharply as we can, but it is a long process to follow all of those procedures set out by the state. The next elements of the presentation, we're going to go into the details of the project. We'll go over that really quick. I know it's a long night for you all. This is a vicinity map identifying 2 properties that would be brought into the city adjacent to that C4 zoning down at the Sittler USU campus area along Highway 191. We do have a side-by-side slide. It was contained in the packet to identify the HC Highway Commercial and our C4 zone. They are fairly consistent with each other. However, there are, for a development standpoint, clear advantages in participating in the city's zoning standards, both in density, height, and ability to develop within that building envelope. So there's a clear incentive, I think, for this property owner to pursue pre-annexation, but do it through our C4 zoning. In addition to that, the applicants did provide a site plan.
Just to let you know, as far as the general plans go and that type of thing, it does meet our requirements going through the general plan. Both the future land use map and the annexation boundaries, they're both in the boundary, and retail or commercial use is designated once it gets annexed into the city as a commercial type of use. And then, so this is just a proposed use of the property. They are proposing to do a mixed use development with residential and retail space. And again, with that residential, we do have the pre-annexation agreement of having the 50% of the AEH households and that type of thing. And I think Corey, you wanted to say something else, right?
Yeah, wrapping up some of the mayor's earlier points about the agreement itself. So this is where we transition from overall process, the pre-annexation from a proposal perspective into the agreement language itself. And Nathan has been coordinating on the exact language utilized in what we're reviewing tonight. But the components that the mayor outlined as far as 50% AEH through our new ordinance, we're going to maintain essentially the same provisions, same enforcement, and same regulations in that way. The 50-year, it is consistent with what we were proposing, and the restricted covenant is a similar but different tool. Again, as a lending strategy, the developer is intending to, I think, utilize this description of a tool of restrictive covenant rather than that deed restriction. To our effect, it's going to be the same effect on the maintenance of the property, but for the developer, it allows different lending agencies to participate. And then in addition to that was, rather than a parachute clause as we had designed in the original ordinance, it was a foreclosure element similar to what we have used, but again, from a lending strategy perspective. So we're, from a staff perspective, happy with the provisions that were laid out. I think the proposal obviously has not been officially reviewed. We did run it through our development review team, provided initial comments. It's, as you can tell, not fully developed or fully baked up at this point, but there are no major red flags that would prevent us from pursuing something like this. At this point, I think staff's fairly comfortable with where we're at. If there are any questions, we're obviously sitting right here. Nathan could maybe answer any specific questions about the drafting of the agreement itself. I did notice we also have a citizen that might have interest in making a comment. I know they probably missed the earlier citizens we heard, but they are here for this item if the council wanted to hear from them, and then our applicant as well.
Questions for staff? No questions.
I can ask a question.
Okay, Ronnie.
Let me find my question. Oh, really just to restate for clarity of anyone listening, because, you know, I'm a layperson and a lawyer, and Nathan walked me through kind of explaining why the document in some places refers to how 50% of the units will go to active employment households, but in other places it's clearly spelled out that it could be active employment households or students, faculty, or visiting, I think visiting faculty. I don't remember the exact wording. Just so, you know, people are always listening, and housing is the situation is so dire in our community. So just so anyone listening understands, right? These 36 units could be rented, it could be new employees coming to work in these 6,600 square feet of retail and restaurant space, could be people affiliated with the university, could be other active employment households, but that's the broad scope of everyone, right? That would fall under that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that additional component really falls into
Yeah.
the nature of what we were
Yeah.
trying to encapsulate, but maybe we weren't able to because of the dimensions of that tool. We weren't able to include these folks. So in the agreement, we have full liberty to do that. So
Okay,
it's
yeah, no,
not-
just so
yeah,
no
not
one
about
later gets
inclusion.
confused and says, oh, I thought I, read that it was only for AEH. So,
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for staff? Questions for Ellen? I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote for a motion to approve the pre-annexation agreement for Shamrock Properties. Do you want to talk? No, okay. There'll be opportunity for comment down the road, so I'm not going to open it up for public comment at this time. So I'll call for a motion.
I move that Moab City Council approve the pre-annexation agreement for the Shamrock properties.
Second.
I'll second it.
All right, have a motion made by Luke, seconded by Jason. Any discussion, Luke? Jason? Any other council members? I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Great, thank you.
Congratulations, guys. I go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it. 30 seconds.
I'm a
neighbor.
right, and I understand that, and I think right now it's a property, it's a pre-annexation. And so as you saw in the outline of the annexation process, there'll be an opportunity for a public hearing. So at this point, I'm not going to take any public comment. Okay,
Thanks for not listening to citizens. I know I'm not the last citizen, I'm in Benson County, but you guys are creating literally a peninsula that has no access to Moab City.
okay,
You're creating all these cherry stems. If you're going to annex the city, follow your general plan.
okay. Well, you're welcome to come and make comments when we have a public hearing. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to city manager updates. Where's Jared? We need him. Okay.
Wow. Sounds like we'll be hearing
I
from
guess
some.
he was upset. Well, I
That's
think
what he-
I think you identified that the neighbors were not going to be happy with this. All right, Carly.
Great. That's what the annexation process is for, to hear
Right.
all those concerns. Okay, for my administrative reports, I have a few events to alert you about. We won't be meeting again for another month, so it'll be the beginning of December, and some fun holiday events will be happening before then. This November 12th, the Saturday, is the annual Turkey Trot. You can register online or in person. And wait one sec, you can register in person. I just got these details. That's on site from 7:30 to 8:30 on Saturday morning at the MRAC lobby. And they've changed up the course this year, so I'm sure everyone wants to see what the new course looks like. Please participate. It's one of my favorite events. December 2nd, we have the tree lighting and electric light parade that are coming up. And that the mayor will be lighting the tree for the city. Yes, you will be. And
Am I going to get to ride on the fire truck with Santa Claus?
if you want to be part of the parade, we can encourage anyone who wants to participate in the parade, please let me know, because there is ample opportunity and we welcome your participation. We have a city holiday party, which will be held December 9th, and we'll be sending out details for that. But we just wanted you guys to be able to put that on your calendar so you don't schedule around it, or you can schedule around it rather. And finally, not really related to festivities at all, but related to our water resources management plan. There is an elected officials focus group, which was a focus group December 14th. It is a Zoom discussion, and it will be with city staff, other agency staff who are participating, the consultants, as well as some elected officials who have been participating thus far. So Luke is our representative. I think Bruce Adams is participating for San Juan County. And then I can't recall the other participants, but it's a focus group. It's open to the public for discussion. And ahead of that, we will be having a council update on that plan on December 13th, which is when we meet again. But just so folks can get that on their calendars, that would be great. Ben mentioned this a little bit earlier. We sent out the RFSQ to all of you for final comments. It has gone to the state procurement's office for their review and comment. But if you had any questions before we publish that by next week, that would be great. This Thursday is the deadline and we'll publish on Monday. So please feel free to let us know what you think of it. And then one final item, the mayor has asked that as we build institutional capacity into City Hall, that's one of my goals for at least the first year, to just give a highlight of one of the steps that we're taking. And the latest one that we're initiating is to actually formalize some administrative policies and incorporate them into Lexipol, which is where we keep a lot of our administrative interpersonnel policies and police policies. As city manager, I can give administrative policy, but we don't have like a centralized location or database where they're being held. For example, I don't know necessarily what other administrative policies exist from other city managers, like what those policies are in place. So I would want to make sure, one, that staff can currently find them if they have questions, and two, anyone who replaces me knows what's already in place, or maybe something that they would want to change. So just an update on some housekeeping we're doing internally.
Great. Thanks, Carly. Questions for Carly on her updates? All right. We'll start with you, Caitlin. Council reports.
I attended a Community Renewable Energy Agency board meeting, and work proceeds to currently we are working on the low income engagement plan. We also had a separate meeting with Grand County, the person who's sort of running that sort of coordination at the state level, as well as Castle Valley, to just sort of align what our approach is going to be here too. There'll be some what are called programmatic approaches, which will just apply to all the communities, but then we can also potentially choose additional ones. And I attended the travel council meeting today, except I missed the beginning and the end. It seemed like it was almost entirely talking about the budget proposal for their very large budget. So, but if there were any modifications to August's proposal, I missed them, but maybe.
I think there was.
Yeah. Attending the Housing Task Force meeting. There's going to be a housing open house on December 5th from 4 to 6:30. So just trying to do some more outreach with the community about both what the city and the county have done for housing, since often people aren't aware that work has happened, as well as letting people know more about like what programs are available to potentially help them out, and then what's coming down the pike. I attended another meeting with Alexi with Utah Clean Cities, advancing both planning for electrifying the city's fleet over time. It'll be gradual, and also looking at community-wide electrification, vehicle transportation, electrification infrastructure, and having sort of a rational approach to developing that. And one thing that's interesting about UCC is that they are grant funded and they basically do this work for free. So I was kind of surprised. I didn't realize this when I first contacted them. And so this was like our third meeting with them. And so I asked them point blank, like, what do you expect from us? And turns out it seems like it's just going to be whatever sort of staff time it takes to engage with them. So a delightful change from our usual engagement with consultants. I attended a couple of webinars, which I'll just mention to you. There's this NAR network, which is run out of the USU office. It's Gateway and Natural Amenity Resource Communities. So, but they have great webinars because they also have this peer exchange component to them, where you basically get in small groups and talk to people from other communities about your challenges related to that topic. So I don't need to go into the details, but hopefully you're getting their invites to these sessions, and you should consider checking them out if you haven't. I also attended a session with this Vail. It was hosted by a Vail outfit, but it was about the Mountain Ideal framework for sustainable destination certification and management, which is something identified in our visioning process as something to pursue. And apparently there's money in the Travel Council budget to support this, although I haven't talked to August to get more specific. It seems like there's some general sort of strategic planning money. And I'm not sure how much of that might go towards something like this. But hopefully, since that was sort of a top level strategic pillar from the visioning, that we can engage our partnership with the county. That's what I've got.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. Ronnie.
I'm gonna not say too much about this because I have a feeling some other people here might have stuff to say, but I'll just mention in case it helps you guys remember to report on it. We had two meetings about timed entry at Arches on October 27th and 28th. The meeting on the 27th was smaller. It was the mayor and Jason and I and some individuals from the Utah Office of Tourism and PLPCO, the State Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office. Try and say that 7 times fast. And then on October 28th, we had a much larger meeting at the Mark with the Park Service doing a presentation, a slideshow, a lot of their findings, a fair amount of data on pros and cons that have come out of timed entry, places for potential improvement, and some of the things like time you spend in line, yada, yada. And that included not just Park Service and these people from the previous day's meetings, but also local business owners and members from the state parks, including the, now I'm going to forget his name, but the fellow who will be the new head of Raptor State Park. So anyway, I found that very informative, but I'll let the rest of you comment on it who were there. I did miss our November 3rd Grand Water and Sewer meeting, but I have been updated by people who attended, and we will be having another meeting this Thursday. Then we did have a Site Futures Committee of that's a subcommittee of Moab's Moab Tailings Project Steering Committee that is planning for looking into the longer term planning of what happens at the Atlas site. And so, as I mentioned the last meeting, I don't need to be redundant, that we are going through a process of updating the community vision for the future of the site. And so you guys will be seeing more outreach about that, but this is just a reminder that there will be an open house here in the council chambers on Wednesday, November 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. And you're invited to come and review and ask questions of Site Futures Committee members about the last update we did, look at maps of the community vision at the time. You can put Post-its on to your heart's content about ideas you have, weigh in about things you like and don't like, because the opportunity to update that. And just know, if you can't go, Grand County, if you go to their homepage under their Grand County Connects, here's the site for anybody, Grand County Connects, all one word, .com. And then if you just have a slash, or you could just look on that site, frankly, it'll you'll see a little thing for Site Futures. You can just click on that and it'll take you to the last community update we did. There's a survey you can take if you can't make it to the open house, or if you just want to do it online instead of if you want a hard copy, you can go to the planning department at the Grand County Courthouse, 125 East Center. So just know that's happening. Most of what we did yesterday in our Site Futures Committee, and I'll let the mayor comment if there's anything else she wants to say about it, was preparing for the open house and who will be there. There won't be any set programs. You can drop in anytime between 6 and 8. The other thing we talked about is a bunch of us from the Site Futures Committee, 7 of us, are going to Grand Junction tomorrow to meet with the Department of Energy, their environmental management and legacy management divisions, and also people who were involved when they Grand Junction took over their uranium mill site from Department of Energy about 20 years ago, to talk with people who were involved in that process to understand how they went about accessing the land and then raising funds to start to develop what is now Las Colonias Park, which they're continuing to improve on, but they have an amphitheater there. They have an inland beach, a number of other amenities. So we're basically just trying to see what we can learn about how the process worked for them. And finally, just I think probably all of us wanted to say, give a shout out to the Grand County Clerk tonight and thank all of the poll workers and candidates and wish everybody luck. And one last thing, only because elections can be stressful for everyone. And some of you on Facebook might have seen this, but my niece, I don't tend to be, but my niece sent me this and I thought it was so cute. Apparently, if you are feeling anxious or need some motivational inspiration, you can apparently call free 707-873-7862, and you will reach an automated line where children associated with the Pep Talk Public Art Project of the West Side School will be happy, kindergarten children, to give you a pep talk of positive thoughts. And it's very cute. I tried it earlier today. There are a number of different categories you can click on your phone on. You can run through them all, but nothing will put a smile on your face like all of these inspirational comments from kids. Okay, that's it.
All right, what's that number again?
Okay, yes, 707-873-7862.
All right.
I'll go talk to them instead of talking to my 16-year-old.
Yeah, well, and it's automated. They don't, apparently it's not interactive in case that's something you were hoping for.
Thanks, Ronnie. Luke.
So I attended portion of the planning commission meeting on the 27th. I had to leave early to get some work done, but we had a representative from the Moab Community Childcare come and present, and they're talking about partnering with the Free Health Clinic to have a brick and mortar childcare facility at the new Free Health Clinic campus. As the Free Health Clinic is really trying to focus a lot on the social determinants of health. We were told that right now in the community, there's about 150 childcare spots, but probably more like 450 are actually needed. So there's a really severe shortage of that. And he also let us know, for anybody who's listening, that there's a large federal grant program where if a household makes less than $80,000 per year, and one parent is working at least 15 hours per week and the other at least 30 hours per week, cost of childcare can potentially be fully covered by that grant program. I didn't get the name of it. I don't think he gave the name of it during the presentation, but if anybody's interested, please feel free to reach out and I will get that for you. The Housing Task Force, or representatives from the Housing Task Force had a presentation, and they are looking to update the area affordable housing plan. And we're looking feedback from the Planning Commission. So there's some good dialogue there. And then for anybody interested, there is an open house at Arroyo Crossing tomorrow beginning at 4 p.m. I met with the mayor and Councilmember Boyd. I attended the Dia de los Muertos event, which is probably one of my favorite events of the year. And is fantastic as usual. And then I attended the trail mix meeting earlier today. Some of the trail mix members and some volunteers have done some work on Hidden Valley yesterday, and were able to help reestablish the beginning of the trail up to the registration stand, because that was kind of completely wiped out. Next month, on December the 5th, on Monday, they're going to be working on the Moab Brand Trail. So if anybody wants to help assist with that. They just voted today to add an active transportation representative for the trail mix committee, particularly with the multi-use path being developed, and so much of our community uses active transportation to get around town. So they figured it'd be good to have a representative kind of from that segment of our community. The Hawks Glide Trail is going to be completed on November 15th. where they're going to be having a grand opening, and there's going to be a volunteer appreciation event at the Mark later on that evening. Trail's basically 99% done already. They're just putting a couple of final touches on it. We had one of the trail ambassadors let us know that so far in total that they've had over 55,000 encounters since starting. And of those, they've talked to 64% of the people, have spent over 1,300 hours on trail, and have seen 5,400 dogs on those trails while they've been out there.
400 dogs. There's more dogs than there are people that live here.
The Forest
Because we all
Service
have several.
reported that they've already had their first avalanche. So anybody who's
Oh,
going
wow.
up into the mountains, please be careful. This was a naturally triggered avalanche,
Okay.
but it just kind of speaks that some of the snow conditions aren't fully stabilized yet.
But there's
And
snow.
yes, there's snow and it looks fantastic up there. And then Geyser Pass is finished and open. They didn't quite finish the parking lot up top. So they're going to be finishing that up in-house. And then the lower parking lot has been, man, I forget what they termed it. It's basically done and you can park there. They're just going to add some rocks and signs and stuff to make it a little bit more structured. But other than that, I think that is all I have on my report.
Thanks, Luke. Tawny.
Actually, I don't think I had any meetings. We didn't have a housing authority meeting because the executive director is on sabbatical
Well,
and healthcare district meeting is Thursday. And I have to bring cookies.
okay, great. I'll see if I can make it. Jason, thanks, Tawny.
All right, see, I don't have a ton of stuff. The parking lot's nice. I took my kids snowboarding this weekend. It was good.
Oh.
Snow was terrible, but the parking lot was nice. So a couple of things that I attended over the last week, I guess. I went to a RAP tax board meeting last night. And last night or 2 nights ago, and they or last night, and they're moving right along. It's a good board. It's very engaged, and he's doing a great job with that. And I think that there's some good stuff coming out of that. I also like when I said I attended a day of Arch's timed entry meetings. You know, I think she kind of hit most of it. You know, it was just listening to people's concerns. I attended a meeting with the mayor, Ronnie, and the Utah Office Tourism delegation, and that was good. I then attended a meeting with the chamber, and then with their their members, and that one was really good. And then we attended the one the next day with the Park Service and stuff. So it was the Park Service I felt Park Service had a really good grasp on what the issues were, you know, and they came to the meeting knowing what they were and with, I think, kind of a plan to figure it out. I attended a meeting on HB 180 and the OHV education bill that's going to be rolling out at the first of the year. It was a good meeting with, there's a lot of people from the county there, the state, and a lot of the outfitters were there as well. There was some miscommunication, I think, with, as you guys probably heard, with what was presented, but all got cleared up that basically they thought that there was going to be a bunch of major changes in the bill, but it turns out that there's not. The bill is basically going forward as it was passed, you know, last year and stuff. So more to come on that, but everybody was very grateful that there wasn't a bunch of changes, and and then you know, I was gonna say I attended on the first part of the travel council meeting. I don't know if you were there when Utah State or Utah Office of Tourism presented.
Right at the end.
Yeah, he was pretty good. You know, he kind of said some things that were interesting, that the travel market is starting to soften. You know, people are worried about a potential global recession. Utah tourism is down about 8.6% compared to 2019 and 17% compared with 2020. And that As far as travel trends, one of the big trends, which I thought was pretty encouraging and interesting, is that dark skies are a big draw for tourism going into the future for national parks. And that was it. That's all. I
Great.
did. So,
Thanks, Jason. Interesting. So the whole state of Utah is down in visitation.
that's what
that-
they were saying.
Yeah, so it's 8% for the state from 2019 and 17 from 2020. And so the Arches reduction in visitation is comparable to the rest of the state.
It is, yeah.
And on that same note, I did attend, I mean, 1 week was like all timed entry week, it seemed like for me. A lot of meetings, appreciate the council members that were involved in those meetings. That was really good. Provided a lot of input. I think the takeaway is I'm very hopeful. I think the Park Service is going to continue the timed entry system program with some modifications. And that's what came across loud and clear from all of us. I think we were all pretty much in agreement. We'd like it to continue, but they need to make it better. And they even talked about it not being a pilot. I can't remember the terminology that they used that they were gonna.
Essentials, something or something.
Right, so-
I can't remember what. it
Yeah,
was.
some Park Service
Yeah.
terminology, but it allows them to continue it without having it to end. As a pilot, usually it just starts and then it ends. So hopeful to hear more about that from the Park Service. Probably we'll have another meeting with them, maybe after the holidays to see what their plans are for the spring. And then in the future site committee for UMTRA, Ronnie did a thorough job on that. One of the conversations that we need to have that I'm hoping that this committee will look at is the land transfer and how that whole process works, who wants it, how that, how we go about doing that. And when we go to Junction tomorrow, I think weather permitting, Ronnie, I mean, if it's like crappy weather, I'm not sure I want to drive over to Grand Junction, but we'll determine that tomorrow morning. And talk about it on the way. But I think,
I'm gonna hold on to Russ's bumper and ski there.
yeah, I think we need to really start having that conversation. Where do we want that piece of property to end up? And so more to come on that. Met with Congressman John Curtis a few weeks ago. That was very productive. We talked mostly about flooding, timed entry, the UMTRA project, and we also talked a little bit about his climate change initiatives. And I just got a message from a group up in the Wasatch that wants to start a roundtable group with mayors to help look at that issue. And so they reached out to me. So I think that's something I'm interested in. I'll look more into that. But I think that would be a beneficial group to be working with, that, whatever that means. I don't even know. I just got the email today. Met with Jen Sadoff at the hospital to discuss some of the challenges the hospital is having with regards to the reduction in tourism and the impacts that that's having on their bottom line, and also the construction, which is moving along. It should be done spring of 2024. And I also had an opportunity to talk to them about some of their lighting. And so Jen was going to look into that to make some of their outside lighting a little bit more compliant. I don't know if you've ever noticed when you drive by the hospital, they're pretty big, bright lights on the side that aren't really necessary. So she was going to look into that. So that was good. And then I'm coordinating, you should be getting an email from Sasha for our group meetings next week. I'd like to meet with you all before the holidays. And that's it. Do we need a closed session? Nathan's still here. Here if we want one. Does anybody need, I don't think we really have any updates on litigation, which is our kind of ongoing executive session. There's really nothing new to talk about at this point. Any updates that we have, I can address with you guys next week. So that's it. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Made by Tawny,
Second.
seconded by Kalen. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're adjourned.